Those not having privileges of the floor will please vacate the chamber at this time. All members and guests in the galleries will please rise as we are led in prayer today by Pastor Mason Ballard, guest of the gentleman from the 60th, Douglas Wilson.
Good morning. Let us pray. Almighty God, source of wisdom and truth, giver of all good gifts, we humbly ask you to guide and bless the men and women of this legislature, that they may lead our beloved state as servants, servants who care for the least of these, servants who honor and respect all people made in your image, servants who are peacemakers, truth lovers, promise keepers, bridge builders, and example setters, servants who are tough yet tender, powerful yet meek, smart yet teachable. Grant these servants a spirit of wisdom, discernment, and unity for the good of all people and the glory of your name. Father, forgive us when we fail you. Forgive us when we fail each other, and lead us in a still more excellent way. In the power of your Spirit, through Jesus Christ, the risen Lord. Amen.
Amen. Members and guests will please remain standing as we are led in the Pledge of Allegiance today by the gentleman from the 60th, Douglas Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Salute, O glory, with me and pledge allegiance to the principles it represents. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Members and guests may be seated. Reading of the Journal.
Journal of the House of Delegates, Charleston, Wednesday, February 13th, 2019.
Lady from the 49th. Chair believes the lady from the 49th has unanimous consent that further reading of the Journal be dispensed with and it be approved as having been read. Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Introduction to guests. Lady in the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in the West Gallery, I've got students from my 8th grade Taylor County Middle School for Youth and Government. They are visiting with their teachers, Lindsay and Sam. If they would stand up in the house, please make them welcome.
Gentleman 66, Douglas Espinosa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to have in the North Gallery my Valentine, my wife Kathy, and our youngest daughter Emma. Will they stand? Will the House please make them welcome?
Gentleman the 44th, Douglas Hannah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in one of the galleries, I have students here with me from, back here, I have students here with me from the Webster County Youth and Government, and they really did get to see us in action this morning, as I had about 10 or 15 concerned teachers in my office as well. But if you would stand when I please call your name: Damon Steele, Gregory Westfall, Emily Isabel, Emma Musto, Aiden Clutter, Samuel Hall, Isaac Pyle, and the two chaperones with them today are Jeff Bell and Lisa Hamrick. If the House will please make them feel welcome.
Gentleman the 7th, Douglas Harshbarger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I have two guests from Pleasant County, Mark and Charmel Radcliffe up in the North Gallery. If we could please make them welcome. Thank you.
Gentleman the 14th, Douglas Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Joining us from Point Pleasant Junior High School with the Youth in Government, we have several students, and if they would stand as I call their names, and also their teacher, Mrs. Farley. We have Olivia Dunn, Natalie Fields, Jada Kent, Madison Brown, Calvin Raby, Corey Graham, and Blake Edmonds. And again, their teacher, Mary Farley. If the House would please welcome them all, please.
Gentleman the 32nd, Douglas Fast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of Delegate Kessinger, Staggers, and myself, I'd like to welcome from Fayette County Youth and Government students. They're in one of the galleries, if the House would please make them feel very welcome.
Gentleman from the 28th Delegate Pack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the North Gallery today, on behalf of the entire Raleigh County delegation, we have students with us from Youth and Government Day. If they would please stand, and escorting them is my friend Aaron England. If the House would please make them welcome.
Gentleman from the 46th Delegate Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure which, I see him up here. We have some retired teachers coming down to the legislature today. We also have some teachers from Lewis County today. I'm not sure which gallery they're in, but if everybody would please stand and the House make them feel welcome.
Gentleman from the 16th Delegate Mant.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day. I would like, on behalf of all of our colleagues here in the chamber, to welcome back Delegate Kump. He's had a tough time, and it's a great day to have him back.
Gentleman from the 1st Delegate McGeehan.
Okay, I don't do this often, but please indulge me. I have my little girl, Kennedy, up at home on FaceTime here. And if you could please all just wish her a happy Valentine's Day on 3. 1, 2, 3. Happy Valentine's Day, sweetheart.
Thank you. Gentleman from the 12th Delegate Westfall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have pages with us today, from 3 of them from Ripley Middle School. They're 7th graders. If I call your name, if you're in here, please stand. Audrey Haskin, Tori Davis, and Braden Freshour. Will the House please make them feel welcome?
Gentleman from the 23rd Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have with us today a couple of guests. I think both of them are in the South Gallery. For whatever reason, on Valentine's Day, my wife decided to join us, so my wife, Cosette, if she would stand to be recognized. And also, we have a former member that's with the Boone County Retired School Employees, Tom Bias, a former member of this body. So if they would both please stand and House make them feel welcome.
Gentleman from the 60th Delegate Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask everyone to welcome Pastor Mason, and in the West Gallery, Miss Holly Ballard.
Gentleman from the 10th Delegate Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in the gallery, or today in the Capitol, is Arts Day, and I'd like the other delegates from Wood County to join me in welcoming from Artsbridge in Parkersburg, Melanie Gangery and Amanda Stevens, if they'd stand. And the House, please make them welcome.
The gentleman from the 4th Delegate Canestraro.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm blessed today to introduce a former colleague of ours who's back on the floor with us today, a true friend, mentor, coach, and educator, seated next to Delegate Desario, Mike Farrow.
Lady from the 42nd, Delegate Lavender Bow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the West Gallery, we have a couple of guests from the 42nd District. If you ladies would please stand. They're here for Arts Day, and they represent one of only 4 Carnegie Halls in the world, located in Lewisburg, West Virginia. Sarah Krickenberger is the Executive Director, and Molly Arbogast is the Development Director. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 30th, Delegate Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have a couple of additional Raleigh County Youth and Government students with us today in the South Gallery. If Ola Baraguthi would stand, and her teacher, Ms. Tori Massetti. And then right next to her is somebody that looks a little bit like me, and when she wants to poke fun at me, she sounds a little bit like me. So my daughter, Claire Bates. Do you want to stand up? And thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 3rd, Douglas Fluharty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of Delegate Storch and myself, we have some retired school employees from Ohio County in the gallery. I'd like to say hello to Ivan and Debbie Miles and Anita Chops. If they would stand in the house, make them feel welcome.
The gentleman from the 19th, Douglas Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of myself and Delegate Hicks, we have pages from CK Elementary today. If they would stand up when we call their names, I'll do half and Delegate Hicks will do half. They are Olivia Fry, Levi Yeoman, Evan Mannon, Andriel Johnson, Cole McChristian, Addison Bocook, and Braxton Brown. Please give them a round of applause.
The gentleman from the 19th, Douglas Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of Robert Thompson, Chad Lovejoy, and Matt Rohrback and myself, I'd like to announce the remaining pages from Cerrito Canova Elementary with us today. Pages, if you would stand when I announce your name. They are as follows: Ashton Hardesty, Jaden Perry, Gage Roberts, Genesis T., Gracie Perry, Jack Shoemaker, and Lake Rayburn. And they are escorted by their principal, Deidre Farley, and several of the parents. Please give them a round of applause.
The gentleman from the 16th, Douglas Linville.
Mr. Speaker, in the Capitol today, and I'm not sure if they've went over to the Senate yet or not, are representatives from the VH1 Save the Music Foundation, which has donated 3,230 free instruments valued at $2.975 million to 85 schools in all 55 counties. So on behalf of myself and every one of my colleagues in this chamber, I'd like to welcome the folks from the VH1 Save the Music Foundation. Is anybody still here? Either way.
The gentleman from the 48th, Douglas Hamrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just wanted to introduce my Fraser Singleton intern back here, Caitlin Smith. If she'd stand, she's from Wyoming County, currently a student at Concord University, majoring in history and political science, minoring in international studies and pre-law. If the House would please make her welcome.
Gentleman from the 34th, Douglas Boggs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Really excited today. I've got a lot of folks, wonderful friends in the gallery today here, as well as you, Mr. Speaker. On your behalf, as well as mine, from Gilmer County, retired school employees and teachers, Marie Schimmel and Francis Fitzwater, if they would stand. And also from Braxton County, we have Pat McPherson, Beth Adkins, Marty Wine, Pat Blake, Martha Bell Taylor, Ruth and Tom Mooney, Martha Dean, Renee Anderson, Rodney Skidmore, and my wife Jean Boggs. If they would stand and members would make them welcome. And Mr. Speaker, also, I think it's very appropriate that they're there on the front row because they're wonderful mentors, because right behind them we have YLA 8th graders from Braxton County Middle School, and they're led by their advisor, Lori Dittman, Amanda Kreiner, their chaperone, if they would stand, and also Haley Butcher, Bailey Lockard, Natalie Rose, Kaylee Kreiner, Russell Bramble, Justin Bishop, Adam Smith, and Addison Grindo. Please make these fine young men and women welcome.
The gentleman from the 50th, Douglas Angelucci.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of Delegates Caputo and Longstreth, I'd like to introduce two good friends of ours in the South Gallery. From here in Charleston, I'd like to introduce Ryan Frankenberry, and a good friend of mine from Glenwood in Mercer County, Miss Tina Russell. If they would please stand in the house, make them feel welcome.
The lady from the 50th, Douglas Longstreth.
I did. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In our South Gallery, I have two good friends. They're amazing retired teachers. They still continue to work for the AFT tirelessly to do the right thing for education, and I'm very proud to be able to introduce them. Would they please stand and please give them a welcome? Susan Kelly and Rosie Saunders.
The gentleman at 26, Douglas Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I'd like to thank the AARP for the Valentine's candy and the Truck Association for the wonderful cookie, and wish a happy Valentine's Day to everyone in the chamber. I have a couple of pages from McDowell County, from Bradshaw Elementary, and I'd like them to stand and be recognized. Gracie Kennedy and David Baldwin. And their parents, and their escorts, George and Charity Kennedy, and Fred and Paula Baldwin. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The lady from the 42nd, Doug Lavender Bow.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Are there further, the gentleman from the 42nd, Doug Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of Delegate Lavender Bow and myself, in our South Gallery today, we have some students from Eastern Greenbrier Middle School who are here for Youth in Government Day. If they'd stand when I call their name, please. Bailey Caraway, Josie Irvin, Delaney Voiles, Ella Colombo, Sydney Booz, Allie Wills, Kylie Criddle, Lauren Rogers, Cedric Alder, Jackson Williams, Cole Snyder, Lawson Hamilton, and they're chaperoned by Ty Brenovich, Jim Alder, and Townley Hamilton. And I would like to say a sincere thank you for what you brought me this morning. Thank you all. With House, please make them welcome.
Are there further introductions? If not, report to standing committees.
Your Committee on Government Organization has had under consideration House Bill 2439 relating to fire service equipment and training funds for volunteer and part volunteer fire companies, and reports back a committee substitute with the recommendation that the committee substitute do pass.
Report to be received.
Your Committee on Government Organization has had under consideration House Bill 2958, authorizing the state auditor to conduct regular financial examinations or audits of all volunteer fire companies, and reports the same back with the recommendation that it do pass.
Report to be received.
Your Committee on Government Organization has had under consideration House Bill 2830, establishing next generation 911 services in this state, and reports the same back with amendment with the recommendation that it do pass as amended, but that it first be referred to the Committee on Finance.
Report to be received. Bill be referred to Committee on Finance.
Your Committee on Government Organization has had under consideration House Bill 2542, permitting directors of county emergency phone systems to obtain mobile phone emergency lines, and reports back a committee substitute with the recommendation that the committee substitute do pass.
Report to be received.
Your Committee on Pensions and Retirement has had under consideration House Bill 2229, adding violations of law upon which a public servant's retirement plan may be forfeited, and reports the same back with amendment with the recommendation that it do pass as amended, but that it first be referred to the Committee on the Judiciary.
Report to be received. Bill be referred to Committee on Judiciary.
Your Committee on Pensions and Retirement has had under consideration House Bill 3095, establishing a minimum monthly retirement annuity for certain retirants, and reports the same back with the recommendation that it do pass, but that it first be referred to the Committee on Finance.
Report to be received. Bill be referred to Committee on Finance.
Your Committee on Pensions and Retirement has had under consideration House Bill 2595, establishing the West Virginia Division of Natural Resources Police Officer Retirement System, and House Bill 3070, relating to the accrued benefit of retirees in the West Virginia State Police Retirement System, and reports the same back with amendment with the recommendation that they each do pass as amended, but that they first be referred to the Committee on Finance.
Report to be received. Bills be referred to the Committee on Finance.
Your Committee on Rules has had under consideration House Concurrent Resolution 2, Senator J. Frank Dean Memorial Bridge, House Concurrent Resolution 4, Gold Star Families Highway, Committee Substitute for House Concurrent Resolution 7, Kidd Brothers Bridge, Committee Substitute for House Concurrent Resolution 11, U.S. Army Command Sergeant Major Timothy Allen Bolliard Memorial Bridge. House Concurrent Resolution 19, U.S. Marine Sergeant Stephen E. Drummond Memorial Bridge. House Concurrent Resolution 23, U.S. Army Sergeant Rodney David King and U.S. Army Sergeant James Harris King Memorial Bridge. House Concurrent Resolution 26, George Roush Memorial Bridge. House Concurrent Resolution 43, U.S. Army Air Corps Technical Sergeant Ralph H. Ray Bridge. And House Concurrent Resolution 44, U.S. Marine Corps Private First Class Randall Carl Phelps Memorial Bridge, and reports the same back with the recommendation that they each be adopted.
Report will be received.
Your Committee on Health and Human Resources has had under consideration House Bill 2947 relating generally to telemedicine prescription practice requirements and exceptions, and reports back a committee substitute with the recommendation that the committee substitute do pass, and with the recommendation that the second reference to the Committee on the Judiciary be dispensed with.
Report to be received. Lady from the 49th.
Mr. Speaker, the two chairs have conferred on this matter, and I now ask unanimous consent that second reference of the bill to the Committee on Judiciary be dispensed with.
Lady from the 49th asks unanimous consent that the second reference for House Bill 2947 to the Committee on Judiciary be dispensed with. Are there objections? Chair hears no objection. Second reference be dispensed with. Are there further reports to standing committees, reports to select committees, messages from the executive, messages from the Senate?
The Clerk of the Senate announces that the Senate has passed without amendment committee substitute for House Bill 2446, Blue Alert Plan.
Message be received.
The Senate has passed committee substitute for Senate Bill 40, establishing military service members court program.
Message will be received. Bill will be referred to Committee on Judiciary, then the Committee on Finance.
The Senate has passed Senate Bill 47, providing wind power projects be taxed at real property rate.
Message will be received. Bill will be referred to Committee on Government Organization, then the Committee on Energy.
The Senate has passed Senate Bill 153, providing greater flexibility for making infrastructure project grants.
Message will be received. Bill will be referred to Committee on Technology and Infrastructure, then the Committee on Finance.
The Senate has passed committee substitute for Senate Bill 285, relating to sale of homemade food items.
Message will be received. Bill will be referred to the Committee on Agriculture and Natural Resources, then the Committee on Judiciary.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 291, relating generally to survivor benefits for emergency response providers.
Message will be received. Bill will be referred to Committee on Finance.
The Senate has passed Senate Bill 296, providing 11-month window to permit members of PERS to purchase credited service.
Message will be received. Bill will be referred to the Committee on Pensions and Retirement, then the Committee on Finance.
The Senate has passed committee substitute for Senate Bill 345, relating to fire service equipment and training funds for VFDs.
Message will be received. Bill will be referred to the Committee on Fire Departments and Emergency Medical Services, then the Committee on Finance.
The Senate has passed committee substitute for Senate Bill 405, increasing limit on additional expenses incurred in preparing notice list for redemption.
Message will be received. Bill will be referred to the Committee on Government Organization.
The Senate has passed Senate Bill 461, providing for personal income tax withholding on certain lottery winnings.
Message will be received. Bill will be referred to the Committee on Finance.
The Senate has passed committee substitute for Senate Bill 481, relating to Judicial Vacancy Advisory Commission.
Message will be received. Bill will be referred to the Committee on Judiciary. Are there further messages from the Senate? Resolutions.
House Concurrent Resolution 71, John and Wilbur Hahn Dutch Hollow Memorial Pioneers Bridge.
Lady in the 49th.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the further reading of resolutions introduced be dispensed with and they be considered as formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committees as indicated on the chamber automation system.
Lady in the 49th asks unanimous consent that further reading of resolutions introduced be dispensed with and that each resolution be considered as having been formally introduced and referred to the committees as shown on the chamber automation system. Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Petitions, motions, bills introduced, unfinished business, bills on third reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 451, Comprehensive Education Reform.
Gentleman from the 48th, Doggett Hamrick, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill sets the uniform levy rates for county boards, and they will be the rates used for determining local share for the school aid formula. It also allows county boards to raise their rates up to the statutory maximum after voter approval at a general election. It establishes a new $250 tax credit for qualifying educational expenses incurred by classroom teachers and service personnel employed by the public or private schools. County boards are authorized to establish an open enrollment policy that permits students not residing in that county to attend its schools, but preserves any existing transfer agreements between counties and SSAC eligibility requirements. The bill also increases the minimum time school counselors must spend in direct counseling relationship with students to 80%. It provides for a teacher recommendation to be the primary consideration on student promotion. It restarts the Innovation Zone program at $5 million and makes magnet schools eligible for funding. 2 low-performing elementary schools are authorized to convert to charter schools under the authorization of their county boards. The charter schools would also be eligible for funding to assist them with serving exceptional children with high-cost, high-acuity special needs. The cost of sending notice letters following 3 to 5 unexcused student absences is replaced by meaningful contact by the principal or attendance director. The school aid formula is amended to establish a floor of 1,400 students in net enrollment for the purposes of calculating state aid. Funds personnel or professional student support personnel at 4.7 positions for 1,000 students, or 1,000 students. It includes others such as social workers and psychologists in addition to nurses and counselors. It increases the cap for adults enrolled in the advanced career education programs from 1,000 to 2,500 and requires these programs to meet certain performance standards. It increases the allowance for current expenses from 70.25 to 71.25% of cost of operations and maintenance. Recaptures all remaining growth in local shares and returns it to the counties generating the growth, but maintaining funding growth for all counties, improving instruction, technology, and teacher and leader and professional growth, and ensuring all counties get a base of $150,000 for local priorities. Also provides funding for 1 law enforcement officer in each school after all federal funds are exhausted. Provides for suspension or early dismissal of school personnel by a county board upon finding of abuse by the Department of Health and Human Resources or a misdemeanor with a rational nexus between the conduct and the performance of the employee's job. The bill imposes a duty and authority of schools to provide safe and secure environment and take necessary steps to ensure this. The bill provides a 5% average pay raise for teachers, $2,120, and beginning on 7/1/20, grants an additional 3 years of experience for salary purposes to fully certified classroom math teachers who teach math at least 60% of their teaching time. So on average is an additional $1,767. A new section would require the Department of Education to develop a specialized mathematics course for classroom teachers and provide a one-time $2,000 payment to classroom teachers who complete the course, become certified math teachers and teach math in their certified area for at least 60% of that teaching time. The formula-driven definition of salary equity is deleted. County boards are authorized to establish local teacher salary supplements that meet different local needs for teachers who are fully certified and assigned in critical need and shortage areas. Those assigned to schools in remote geographical areas or with high turnover rates, teachers who in addition to teaching serve as master teachers, mentors, or academic coaches, etc., to assist others to improve their professional practice. Seniority is considered when the county board is required to reduce, transfer, or recall teachers unless a teacher's last personnel evaluation is unsatisfactory. County boards are still required to establish a policy that sets forth qualifications, and they are limited to those listed in the section for employment. The requirement to notify all qualified personnel on the preferred recall list by certified mail before filling a position expected to last 20 days or longer is replaced with an annual notice of application procedures and any websites used to advertise vacancies. Seniority is to be established within 30 days of the date of employment rather than the lottery prior to release. And the requirement to compile and annually make available to all employees a list of all professional personnel, their areas of certification, and their seniority is deleted. The bill provides a 5% pay raise for service personnel, on average $1,150, effective 2019-20 school year. It divides the entitlement to personal leave into halves of the employment term and provides for a new bonus of $1,000 at the end of the school year for a county board employee who has not used more than 4 personal leave days. The Underwood Smith Teaching Scholars Program is transformed into scholarships for teaching mathematics, science, and special education. But the scholarships for students currently enrolled in is preserved, and students pursuing music education would still be eligible for scholarships under existing rules. Finally, county boards will be required to provide annual notice for brim coverage and the limits to each insured, including teachers, supervisors, administrators, service employees, superintendent, and board members. Mr. Speaker, that's the long explanation of the bill, and I urge passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? The gentleman, the 64th Douglas Householder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I will attempt to give you a fiscal impact of the provisions of Senate Bill 451. Starting off, there is a 3-step salary increase for math teachers at a cost of $2,300,000. There's a student support staff which adds 400 workers, social workers, counselors, nurses, and psychologists at a cost of $24,300,000. There's a cap of 1,400 student floor, which funds all county boards with fewer than 1,400 students at the base level of 1,400. There's a cost of $10,300,000. There's an increase in current expenses in Step 6A of $1,700,000. There is a local share increase, approximately $15,750,000. We added resource officers. Last night, I'm going to go with the fiscal note provided by the gentleman from the 55th of $40,500,000, and keep in mind we do not know the impact of if there's any retirement cost. There's a TERS contribution, regular and unfunded, a cost of $18,500,000. There is a mathematics incentive program, which is a $2,000 one-time bonus for math teachers meeting the requirements, $2,364,216. We raised the employee attendance incentive bonus from $500 to $1,000. That cost is $6,409,274. The West Virginia Public Charter School Commission comes in at $200,000. The Underwood Smith Teaching Scholars comes in at $1,100,000. There is a $250 tax credit for teachers. That is a cost of $56,000. I believe there was an addition for the innovation zones of $5 million. The pay raises are $67,740,948. The gross cost of Senate Bill 451 as of today is approximately $202,570,438. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The lady from the 50th, Douglas Longstreth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to speak to the bill.
Lady may proceed.
Thank you. Yesterday when we talked, and I spoke on this bill, and I said that charter schools should never be in this bill. I completely still agree with that today, that that should be a separate issue. It should have been put on the table and discussed. But when I went back to my room and I look at this, and I came in this morning and I listened to some of the leaders of the education, and we looked at some of the things that we did actually do in this House last night that were good for education. The bonuses, the teacher raises, but the most important was from one of our delegates, Spinagle, putting in for law enforcement into each of the schools. I will not deny the students protection that they so need in the schools that we have voted to put into schools. I believe the teachers, service personnel will understand that the children do come first, regardless of raises, regardless of whatever else that we do. It makes it very difficult for me to say that I voted no yesterday, but today I'm going to vote for this bill only for that factor that we need to protect the students. We did take a lot of things out as far as at-will employees. The pilot program for charter schools, I believe, and I'm going to trust our counties, that they will never implement them unless it becomes an extreme emergency, because we need to keep the funding in our schools, give the innovation ideas, let the teachers do what they do, give them some respect and let them do what they do in the schools. Quit letting them teach to a test. They are certified, they are brilliant, that's what they went into the field for. And I'm going to put my trust into the Board of Education that that's what will happen. But I'm not going to deny the students' safety. And today I will say, I will vote for this bill, but if the Senate, if it leaves this House and the Senate changes one sentence, one period in this bill, and it comes back to this House, I will vote against the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 58th, Doug Coles.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to urge passage of the bill before you. Yesterday, we used the analogy of a pot of chili. And I would suggest that, well, as we worked through yesterday, we sorted through some ingredients. Some things went into the chili. Some ingredients did not go into the chili. And I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the things that went in that I think make this bill worth voting for. For empowering some local control, into this bill remains the levy rate setting, the local share funding, the local salary supplements. For school choice and flexibility remaining in the bill, magnet schools, 2 charter schools, expanded innovation zones, and open enrollment. Those things, my friends, are serious and important ingredients for school reform in West Virginia. It also adds counselors and nurses and behavioral health supports in our schools. It adds to classroom supplies in our classrooms across the state. It's a 5% raise, a necessary and important raise for professionals, and it includes a $2,000 bonus for math teachers. There are some good things in the ingredients that went into the pot of chili. I would suggest we get ourselves a bowl and pass the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 1st, Doug McGeehan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Chair of Finance please yield for a quick question? I didn't hear your overview on the total fiscal cost of the bill. I couldn't find it on the automation system here. Could you just run that down real quick for me?
Well, the total cost is $202,570,438. That's the total cost.
And
that does include the pay raises.
Do you project or assess that the 5% pay increase for public school teachers and service personnel within the bill will also then carry over into the budget to provide 5% increase for all public employees as well? Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Not quite. Yeah, it's in the governor's proposed budget bill.
Okay, so
yeah,
the assessment would be that that likely will be in our budget.
Absolutely, yes.
And that will add to, if you want to add the two together, increase not this bill specifically, but taken as an aggregate with that on the side, it will increase the total cost.
You could take this $202 million that I mentioned to you and subtract out the $67 million in pay raises, and that would be the total new cost for Senate Bill 451 that we added to the governor's proposed.
Right. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm trying to actually figure it out.
Yeah.
So right now it's over $200 million.
Correct.
And that
includes the pay raises.
And that's just not one-time expenses. This is a base builder, correct?
Not so much for the pay raises. To some degree, no. You're correct. I misspoke.
This is over $200 million.
Yes.
In annual expenditures going forward of an increase, correct?
Yeah.
Total.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. You know, sometimes there's this old Western ethic that I'm proud of from the rich intellectual tradition we have in the West, the steady development of this Western ethic, we sometimes lose sight of, and that is that the means do not always justify the ends. You go back to started sort of with Cicero and his time frame and trying to reconcile what is moral with what is useful, right? And then you go on to Thomas Aquinas, who spoke a lot about this, about how, there are certain universal truths, and you cannot simply disavow these universal truths and become immoral just because you think there's some sort of greater good. If you do, then go on. And I think the culmination with that sort of Western ethic that has a rich tradition in the West, here in the United States, culminated in the latter Enlightenment period with the Kantian imperative by Immanuel Kant. But I'm boring you right now, and my point of bringing this up is, Article 6, Section 30 of the state constitution. If you've read the state constitution and you've taken the oath, right, to support it, is the single object rule. Okay. Well. The single object provision in the state constitution. Now, I know a lot of lawyers on both sides of the legislature here, in the House and the Senate, have said, don't worry about it. Yeah, this meets that provision. This omnibus bill that started in the Senate passes that constitutional muster. I have on email, I won't name his name, a pretty prestigious Republican lawyer that works in this building that says the opposite. But, I'm not going to throw someone under the bus. Guys could probably guess who it is, but I guess what I'm trying to point out is that, yes, this is a comprehensive educational reform package. And that's sort of the reasons given for why this would meet the single object provision. However, if you take a look at it, really what you're saying is, really what it is a common denominator within the bill. The common denominator is the subject, not the object. The common denominator is the subject that all of these different bills that were packaged into one omnibus bill have a common denominator pertaining to education. So, yeah, the subject of all these different bills packaged into one might be the same, but not the object. And so I guess some of my colleagues will say, well, it doesn't really matter because, again, the ends justify the means, right? So if you take your oath of office very seriously and you want to abide by that, well, just disregarding that sort of moral imperative we have to uphold our oaths of offices, right? Disregarding that for some sort of greater good, I just don't think that's right. That's a point I just wanted to make. Okay? I think the right course of action is to debate these different issues by a case-by-case basis, because there's a lot of good in this bill, and there's a lot of things I disagree with, and the same could be said for all of you probably, right? And so the single object provision that was stuck in our state constitution was put there precisely to preclude and prevent situations that we are now facing, where we have to struggle and weigh, between some sort of greater good, or picking between the lesser of two evils. That's what it's there for. You know? So, take it for what it's worth. I think moving forward, really what we're doing is when we do this kind of thing, we lose a lot of trust and we lose a lot of faith in the system and the legislative process from many of our constituents. They not only get confused, but then they start seeing through some of the tactics that we're playing. And it's not, I don't think it's really the House leadership's fault. I'm not putting blame on anyone in this chamber because it started on the other side of the building. You know. So, with that being said, you know, just based on that alone, that's sort of a Western ethic, I'm going to have to oppose the bill.
The gentleman from 67th, Doug Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have done some really good work on this bill in the last week and a half in the Education Committee, in the Finance Committee, and here on the floor. We have taken a bill that came over to us from the Senate as an unwieldy monstrosity, and we have turned it into a workable piece of legislation. That's exactly what we were all sent here to do, and all of us helped in that. Even the gentleman from South Berkeley with his myriad amendments forced us to think individually and collectively exactly what type of innovation we think will work in and for our state. All of us helped in this. There are still a couple of things in this bill that I don't like, but there's much more in it that is good for us. And for that reason, I'm going to vote for the bill. And what I hope is that it comes out of our House with a big enough margin that the Senate will see that with their 18-16 margin, that our House has all the whole cards in negotiation. Thank you.
The gentleman from 17th, Doug Rohrbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When you stop and think about what does state government really do, one of the most the most sacred trust that our state government does is educate our young people. So with that thought in mind, we all came to this chamber wanting to improve our state. That's why every person here was elected. So I don't think there's a more serious issue, the 5 years I've sat in this chamber, that's come in front of this body. And we've had a lot of serious issues. In 30 years in business, in a business that has about 40 owners, I've learned a lot of things. It's trying to herd cats. Well, this chamber, it's not much different than my business. We've got 100 owners. We represent the owners of this state, our constituents. And I'm pleased to report today that I'm very pleased with the work that we've done. We've listened. We've listened to our constituents back home. We've listened to the stakeholders. We've come up with a compromise, which is the way this process is supposed to work. And if at any time, in the time I've been here, we've seen the committee structure work, it's been on this bill. We did what we were sent here to do. The other thing I found out, excuse me, in my business over 30 years, when you got this many owners and you're in a tough meeting, you're probably where you need to be when everybody in the room got some of what they want and everybody in the room got some of what they didn't want. We got to that point last night. That's the reason, Mr. Speaker, I think if anything, through your leadership, you showed us how the committee process is supposed to work. We committed it to committee. We let the committees work. We have a good product. I will support that product, and I urge all my fellow delegates to do it because the process has worked. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman at the 29th, Doug Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We had long debates yesterday, and one in particular, and I love the gentlelady from the 50th's comments earlier today, and I commend her on it, is a debate that we had that I got a little upset at with the gentleman from the 55th Amendment. And I think I even used the words that it was a poison pill. And I listened to the gentleman from the 55th and the gentleman from the 50th. And I hope you went back and looked at the roll call, because I did vote yes on that amendment, along with 81 other people. If there was one thing we all agreed on yesterday, is we got to protect our kids. And I think the gentleman's reformation was in order. I think that's a lot more reasonable, to have a police officer there to protect our kids every day. You know, I've got 5 kids that go to schools in Raleigh County, and we need that. We need that protection. As a good amendment. And as the other gentleman said, we did a lot of bipartisan work yesterday. We listened to each other for 12 long hours. We listened to each other, and we came together. And I'd ask you to prove me wrong. I called it a poison pill yesterday, and it wasn't warranted, my friend from the 55th. It wasn't warranted. Because after I listened to it and after I really thought about it, and we came up with a solution that was affordable and something that we could do, I can get behind it. And I look forward to not having, what are we, 59-41 today? I'd like to see 100 of us lighted up green, because one thing that we do care about is the safety of our children. And I hope all of us can get behind that today. As the chairman's told me before, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We got good things here. We got some things folks don't like. We got some things that are sticking points for folks, but I think we've got a lot of good here. We created a lot of good yesterday. We had a lot of good debate, and I would encourage all of us to vote for this bill today, because it's something that at least at one point yesterday, a super majority of us agreed on something yesterday. Let's do it again today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman of the third, Douglas Fluharty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are 1 year removed from a work stoppage. 1 year from thousands of educators literally knocking on the door of this Capitol wanting to be heard. And since that time, we've heard promises. Promises from the governor about pay raises, about PEIA, which you won't find in this bill. But the one promise that we heard from the governor and from leadership from last year to today, the promise to listen to educators, to say that you do have a voice now. We heard you when you came to Charleston. We're paying attention. We're going to do what's right. Well, have we been listening to them? Because we had public hearings. See how this works down here in this bill? We have a public hearing where educators can come down, and they get about 60 to 70 seconds to come in front of us. Then that red light comes on and they're out. But paid lobbyists can sit in committee all day long, talking about what they were paid to come here for. Now, the educators weren't paid. They came here, spent their own gas money, traveled down here to get in front of us and say we don't like it. They said, we don't want charter schools. You know, the whole premise of charter schools is that we have a poor performing education system, therefore we need charter schools. Well, I don't know, guys. How's the legislature been doing? Maybe we need a charter legislature for poor performance. You know, the gentleman from the first touched on this, and it's the process. We've ignored the promises throughout all this. We haven't kept our word to listen to the educators. And we can't even follow our Constitution. Let's talk about how this bill was rolled out real quick. So, the Senate put this 134-page mess together. It was so unpopular in the Senate, they knew they couldn't get it out of the Education Committee. So unpopular that the Education Reform Bill couldn't get out of the Education Committee. Let that sink in for a second. So what do? We use the Committee of a Whole. That's so popular, it's been used about 3 times in our state's history. In our state's history, 3 times. comes out of there. And you know why we don't do these things, why we're supposed to follow the Constitution? Like, the single object rule was so popular, so important, we brought it with us from Virginia. And we said we're going to keep that. In 1874, in a Supreme Court decision in West Virginia, Shields v. Bennett, that issue was taken up. And quoting the court, said without the single object rule, what we had was a serious evil greatly needing correction. A serious evil greatly needing correction. So we corrected it with our Constitution. Because you know what happens when you don't have a single object rule? You have log rolling. What is log rolling? It's putting together a 134-page bill where we could pluck off each legislator one at a time. I mean, that's what they did in the Senate. One at a time. Except for it wasn't really put together by our legislators, our people, our educators. We went to the ALEC website and hit print. That's what we did. So there's no chance I'm taking the bait on this bill today. I know a lot of people are waffling around now and say, oh, we made it better. And I will give our education committee credit. You took a pile of garbage, and, you know, it doesn't smell so bad anymore. I'll give you some credit for that. You were deliberate. You know, the deliberate body, that's what they call themselves in the Senate, the deliberate body. They weren't very deliberate. Our body was, and I will give credit to those. But I know what's going to happen next, guys. I'm not falling for the tricks, and I'm not taking the bait. Because what will happen next is the Senate will reject this. We know that's going to happen. Your names are going to be on the record voting for it, thinking it was a great bill. The Senate rejects. We go into conferees. We handpick a couple legislators to make the decisions for us. And then we're stuck with a pile of garbage again. I'm not falling for it. I've seen this before. I stood against it before. I will stand against it today. I don't care if it's 99-1. So I will not be supporting this bill, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
The gentleman 28th, Art Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to speak in support of this bill, and that's kind of a change from 3 weeks ago, and I'll tell you why. 5 or 6 years ago, I did some town halls with teachers, and they said, you know, we need more support grades kindergarten through about 4 just to help with the problem of this drug issues that we've got going on. I turned all those reports in from all those town halls for the last 3 or 4 years to the Chairman of Education, to the Department of Education. But in this bill today, we have finally addressed that. We have addressed that big time. A gentleman stood there at that podium during the hearings, and he said something that I hope I always remember, and I hope I can repeat it correctly now. He said, schools today are not the problem. They are the symptom of a problem. He said that, and I think we should remember that. These little kids are coming into our schools not ready to be in school, and this help that we're going to provide in this bill, those first 3 or 4 years, is going to set the stage. And by the way, I think the stage is already set. I think it's already starting to turn, and no one noticed it much the other night up in the Education Committee room, but someone walked in with a little graph or a chart, and they showed that the scores in mathematics and a couple other subjects were on the rise in the first 3 grades. That means that the teachers have already acclimated themselves to the problem in society, and now we all have to just get behind them and let them do their job. There's a lot of good stuff in this bill, a couple things I'm not wild about, but I'm telling you, this is a good package for that little kid getting on that school bus his first time, because now he's going to walk into a classroom ready to learn, and there's going to be facilities and folks there to help him learn and to motivate him to be the very best he can be in the very best state that he can be in. That's our state, and I support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 43rd, Dr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will not lie and say that there is not a lot of good in this bill, because there is. And I also want to commend the other members of the Education Committee, because we have put in a lot of work to make this bill better. However, the teachers of this state, the service personnel of this state, have overwhelmingly said, we do not want charter schools. Do not try to bribe us. We don't want it. I have a problem with passing legislation that directly affects an occupation where people say they don't want part of that legislation. I'm a teacher. When I leave Charleston, when I go back to Elkins and I go back to school, Elkins High School, where I'm a social studies teacher, how can I look my students in the eyes and say, I possibly passed legislation that could be detrimental to your education? We don't know what's going to happen when this bill leaves this House, this body, and goes to the Senate. We don't know. There's a lot of, like I said, there is a lot of good legislation. This is hard. But because of the charter school provision, I cannot support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The lady from 65th, Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been deeply conflicted all morning. I've literally paced the floor. And I will tell you that a year ago, I got on the line with folks like you in the gallery. I marched with you. I walked out with you. And the teachers that I walked with were folks that taught me. They clipped the newspaper articles when I did well in ball games. They made sure that I did well when I wasn't okay. They made sure that I had opportunities. And when you sent me down here, you sent me down here to fight for you. And I took that charge seriously. Overwhelmingly, you said to me, this bill isn't right for us. You overwhelmingly told me that I cannot live with this bill no matter what. As an educator, as service personnel, you said to me, fight for me. And that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to put on that armor. Last night, I said no. You can say a lot of things about me, ladies and gentlemen. You can say I'm mouthy. You can say I'm emotional. You can say a lot of things, but you can also say I'm steadfast. No means no. Mr. Speaker, I will be voting no on this bill. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 4th, Dr. Canestraro.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As our friend from the 67th, Delegate Doyle mentioned, this bill is now workable. But the question that I have is it palatable? From the teachers that I hear from back home, they don't want any charter school whatsoever in this bill. Now, I will give the Education Committee in this body credit for limiting it to a pilot program of 2 existing schools. But that's not palatable for my teachers back home. In a way, I can't blame them, because I know of no one who would want to take 2 cockroaches home with them and not think that they're not going to breed. Another point is, we worked on this bill, and instead of taking the Senate version, which killed seniority, we take it and we don't put it back to where it's placed right now. We weaken it. Well, I wonder and question if we know how much we did weaken it. Or is time going to tell? Maybe that wound that we gave it may be mortal, it may be fatal, and we just don't know yet. The third thing that bothers me about the bill is the stakeholders involved. We didn't ask our teachers of the year from around the state. We didn't ask our principals of the year or superintendents to come down here and give us input on this bill. We asked wealthy corporate out-of-state interests like ALEC, the Koch brothers, Americans for Prosperity, and left our own taxpayers without a place at the table. That bothers me. Nothing in this bill fixes PEIA. Yeah, the governor wants to give $150 million to PEIA. That's wonderful. I commend that thought. Hasn't happened yet, but I commend it. But let's be honest with one another. All that is just a kick of the can down the road again. It doesn't fix the problem that PEIA has. all that does is let some people get past the next election in 2020 and say, look, everything's fine for now, you can vote for me again. But the biggest thing in this whole debate that has bothered me is some of the words that have been spoken in this body. Failure, failure, failure. The system's broken. It's a failure. And to me, that hits at the heart of every educator that is employed in the state of West Virginia in public education. My mom worked for 15 years as a kindergarten aide and a special education aide in Marshall County schools. When she was in special ed, she had sometimes to help lift children who were blind, who couldn't move, that weighed 2 times that she weighed at 110 pounds. She'd come home at night exhausted, crying, upset with what she had to deal with, but she did her best and gave her best for the children in our district. My dad was a unionized educator in the state of West Virginia for over 30 years. God rest his soul. He taught summer school every year and coached 3 sports every year so that we could take vacations during the year and that his family had a little bit more. Because let me tell you, no matter what some people may think, a teacher's salary is not some grand living. They do it because they love what they do. So when you call people like my father a failure, it hurts me. Because go ask some of the students that he taught, go ask some of the students that he coached. I had a conversation with a man about an oil and gas bill 2 days ago in my office. He called me on the phone. He said, "How are you related to Ron Canestraro?" I said, "That was my dad." He goes, "Oh my, what a wonderful man." He coached both of my sons at Union Junior High. He was phenomenal. He'd yell at them, but then he'd pull them out of the game and pull them aside and tell them what they did wrong and put them back in and love them. I dare you to go to those children and ask them. And they're not all doctors or lawyers or teachers. Some of them are blue-collar workers. But I bet they won't tell you that he was a failure, like some want to say in this body. We have several educators in this body, one of which was the National Science Teacher of the Year. Another one that I know has published many books about history. Do you think they're failures? That's what bothers me about this bill. It just seems like some people in here would rather use hateful words to describe our education system, tear it down, instead of letting all the stakeholders that are actually involved in the system have a seat at the table. And for that reason, this bill was simply not palatable to me. No amount of sugar could be added to this medicine to make me take it.
Gentleman 27th, Doug Porterfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to rise in support of this bill. Yesterday we were very long here, very thorough in debate, and as some of my colleagues have said on both sides, it doesn't have everything that I would want in it, and it's not a perfect bill to me. It's not a perfect bill to my other colleagues, but it's something that we've brokered together, and with bipartisan support, I think it is something that we can move forward. I'd really like to thank my colleague from the 60th as I watched him just tenaciously stand for what he thought was right yesterday. And though everything doesn't always wind up the way we want, we brokered, worked together, and have brought something to the table that I think can really be moved forward. We've seen passion, we've seen tenacity, we've seen people stand, we've seen people read emails, we saw our hearts broken with stories from both sides as to things that have happened in our educational system, things that have happened in homes, things that have affected parents. And I just want to commend this body and your leadership, Mr. Speaker, the gentlelady from the 49th, the minority leader, and everyone that's worked together, good, bad, or ugly, on disagreement of trying to put a piece of legislation this comprehensive together and try to get this done. To all of you, thank you.
The gentleman 26, Douglas Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I walked out of here last night after a very long day. I was confused about this bill, as I'm sure many of you were. I texted with a friend who's a teacher, and she reminded me what I did for 35 years as I taught kids. I taught science, and I taught kids that went on to become doctors, lawyers, but I also taught some that didn't do very well. I always figured that was their choice and what they put into their education. It's our choice what we put into this bill. We worked really hard at it. Our schools in West Virginia are not failures. I don't care who says they are, they're not. Every school in West Virginia turns out the good kids if they choose to be successful and go to college. There are times in my life that I've leaned on some pretty strong people. We always say we've stood on shoulders. When I think about my father who had polio, who only had a 12th grade education, but he could do math in his head that I couldn't do on a calculator. I think about my mom, who was a waitress, who wanted us to be the very best we could be. And I think about the fact that I was the only one in my family to go to college. And I went so because there were some teachers that said to me, you can do this. You can be somebody. Now, they didn't know I'd be standing here one day with this microphone in my hand, but they believed in me. I believe in the kids I taught. I believe in the kids that every teacher teaches. I believe that we have an opportunity here with this bill to make a difference, but it's got to be the right difference. It's got to be the bill that we send out of here, if we send it out, that makes a difference. Will this bill make a difference? Yeah, there's some parts that will. We're going to give a pay raise. We're going to put some more flexibility and on and on. I stood here and worked really hard to get the amendment passed to give the teachers a $1,000 raise if they would miss less than 4 days of work. There's so many things in this. You've heard it all. I don't want to go through them. But what it really comes down to is I've got to be able to sleep with my vote. I told the teachers that I would not vote for charter schools. I don't know how this two charter school thing will work, with the teachers having to vote themselves out of a job, because that's what they got to do if they vote for it. 50% plus one would have to say yes. And then what happens to them? I asked that question in committee, really never got an answer, got talked around, but I never really got an answer to it. I came in here today to vote no. I've had several guys talk to me around me, say, Ed, how you doing? What are you going to do? You up or down? You up or down? And I wavered a little bit. I listened to some of their things that they had to say. But then I heard the delegate from the 50th, bless her heart, talk about we got to protect the kids. I told you the story about the kid being shot at Mountview High School. It happened. That wasn't just something I come in here to tell you all about. It was real. And I hope it never, ever happens again. We got a police officer in every school in this bill. And that's what I want. I want the kids protected. Mr. Speaker, I love the bill. I love parts of it, but there's other parts I can't stand. I cannot vote for the charter schools. I will be a no vote on this bill.
The gentleman with 62nd, Douglas Bibby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just like to speak briefly to the bill. Several of us got up last night and we talked about freedom of choice, giving families freedom of choice. That's what our issue is about. I rise in support of this amendment. I believe there is some choice, very little that was left standing after that pig with lipstick, as my esteemed delegate from the other side described the bill when it first came over. We did take pretty much of a meat cleaver to it. But the life of freedom for families, it's still there. It's a very small heartbeat with two charter schools, but that's enough for me to be satisfied with this bill. There's some things that I had to swallow hard on, and that's the paying teachers to come to work, for I think it was $500. Now we're raised to $1,000. I got a lot of emails from both sides. A lot of non-teachers and a lot of teachers don't like the idea that they're using their sick pay for getting sick, which is what it's supposed to be for, and other people are getting paid for not using it. If you don't think there's animosity about that, there's a lot of dissension on both sides of the aisle. But I'm gonna say yes for this bill because it's got some glimmer of hope, just a little bit of a heartbeat there of life for freedom of choice for families. And I've got to say yes. Well, I'll say yes to life, and I say yes to this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the first, Douglas Schwartzmiller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of you that's been around for a long time, you know that I don't get up a whole lot. But I had a teacher a long time ago that told me I would never learn anything while I was talking. And yesterday, I didn't talk. I listened. I listened to all of you. And I appreciate everything that you all said. And I know you said it from your heart, and you said it very passionately. And that's a good thing, because that's why we're all here. But I keep looking up at the board, and I keep seeing comprehensive education reform. That's what we're calling this. But a lot of things that I didn't hear yesterday. I never heard anybody talk about a kid that leaves the house in the morning that doesn't have a coat. Never heard anything about a kid that leaves the house doesn't have a meal in them. I didn't hear anything about how many grandparents are raising their grandchildren today because their kids maybe got tied up with drugs, whatever the case may be. Never heard anybody talk about kids that live in a household where somebody chooses drugs, cigarettes, or whatever over providing those meals for a kid. I never heard any of that. But we're talking about a comprehensive education reform bill. Well, I can tell you all those scenarios right there, a kid's going to be at a disadvantage right out of the gate when they're hungry, when they're cold, when they don't even know if they're going to get home at the end of the day and a parent's going to be home. You know, I don't talk to out-of-state special interest groups or lobbyists. I get my information from people at home, the parents, the grandparents, the school bus drivers, the teachers. That's who I run into in the stores. There's one bus driver I see pretty much every morning, and he tells me how he'll bring granola bars for some of the kids on his bus because he knows that they haven't eaten since they left from lunch the day before. I hear a lot of stories like that, but we didn't hear any stories yesterday about that. We didn't hear how kids that have dyslexia or dysnomia in our school system, 56,000 kids in our public education system suffer from that disease, and 40% of those will drop out before they graduate. They will drop out. But when we talk about statistics and how bad the school system is, we don't talk about addressing any of these issues. We don't talk about fixing those. We just say, let's send them to another building with different people in it, and it's going to get better. Well, let me tell you something. Most of these kids that have to get a coat donated to them or have to find a meal wherever they can, they'll never have an opportunity to go to those schools. You think that's going to fix their problems? You think their parents or grandparents are going to have those means? That's not going to happen. So when we think about what we're doing today and calling it comprehensive education reform, what we did, we took a big mess that came over from the Senate that started out basically with a cup of water, a $67 million bill for pay raises that got blown in to over $300 million. It's now down to $200 million because we just couldn't deal with what was sent up from the governor, a pay raise bill. It was a pay raise bill. That's what it started out. And then it turned into this. And we still haven't addressed a lot of the important issues that's really going to help our kids at the end of the day. You think about it, if you come to work every day and you didn't have a coat or you didn't have something to eat and you sat here just like we all did yesterday and there wasn't a snack to get out there, but you had to keep going, think how well you would have performed. And quite frankly, I think you all performed wonderfully yesterday. As I said, I appreciate all the remarks. I truly do. Doesn't say I agree with them all, but I appreciate them. And I'm going to continue. I'm going to continue to listen to what you all have to say. And hopefully I will learn more. But let's just think about what we're pushing the button on today. And let's think about the kids that are still going to be left behind because there wasn't the important components in this bill that needed to be in there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman with 16th, Doug Mant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we did spend a lot of time yesterday, a whole lot of time. I'm used to doing that at work, as many of us are, but not in this arena and with this type of work. I've mentioned before, my wife teaches. So, you know, I have interest and maybe some more interest in how this bill works out than some of us do. But when we're putting something together, we had a bill sent over from the Senate. I don't want to call it a pile of garbage or a bunch of junk. I think I would rather call it a jigsaw puzzle that came over here that had a lot of good things in it. It was a good-looking picture, and it was our job to put the pieces together to see what the picture could be. And I feel like that yesterday we did that. You know, we have some people saying no, we're not supporting. People saying yes, we are going to support. We had some important things put in the bill last night that weren't there. The gentleman that rose and wanted to have police protection put in all the schools. It kind of caught a lot of people off guard, but it opened a lot of people's eyes. We talked about protection. Do you care about protection of the children? Can you put a price on protection of the children? We say no, and that's what we adopted into the bill yesterday and voted for it. Now those same people want to say they can't support a bill that has protection for our children in there. Is there really now is there a price on our children that we can't protect them, that we can't make sure that our wives, the people that work there, our husbands, our children, that they can't be protected? I don't understand. It's waffling back and forth. I can support. No, I can't. Let's put this in, guys. Sounds like a great idea. Now I can't support it today. You know, what is wrong with people having a choice? I'm in the restaurant business. You may choose me today and somebody else tomorrow. What I found out that by the way I vote, people are choosing the other place more than they want to choose me anymore. That's okay. That's what I got voted in here to do. And that's all right. Everybody has a choice. Heck, I was attacked, hate stuff and all that. It's never happened to me before. By same people that think they're being hated upon. Really? Seriously, we're going to flip all that stuff around? You know, we put charter schools in there, too. We took education savings accounts out. We addressed seniority. We gave a $2,000 bonus for math teachers. which are hard to find. We put a tax credit in. $250 isn't going to cover what my wife spends. She's $400 or $500. And that's just on school supplies. That doesn't include clothes that we send to school because there are children that can't afford them, or tennis shoes we buy because there are children that are disadvantaged and don't have that opportunity. That's just for school supplies. $1,000 year-end bonus. Wow, that's nice. It's more than the $500 that we talked about. It's not $1,500, but it's $1,000. What can you do with $1,000? Think about it. How many meals can you buy? How much gasoline does that put in your tank? You know, this being a private business owner and a family business owner, I haven't been in this type of an arena to get to a decision on what's best and what isn't best. What I feel like we need to do, and I said this a week ago or so, I knew, and you all know, there's no perfect bill, and we didn't come up with a perfect bill. We didn't come out with a bad bill either. What I feel is important, we came out with a fair bill. We're coming out with something that's fair. There's give and take on two sides. I don't care what relationship we're in. Work, family, friendships, anything you have, we're not going to get it all, and we're not going to give all, but we've got to figure out how we're going to make it work. That's what our public teachers taught us to do. Take a problem and solve it. Don't give up. You know, I don't want to give up. I don't want to vote no against it. I want to show that we can come to a decision, we can put something out, and we can make it work, and let's give it a shot. You know, some people still don't like the charter deal in here. Fine, let's see if it works, and then you can come and say, I told you so. Or let's say it does work. We can say, see, this is what happens when you give an option. When you give somebody an opportunity, or when we try something a little different, this is what can happen. Let's think outside the box and think a little bigger. You know, I enjoyed yesterday. I enjoyed the time that we spent in here. I enjoyed listening to everybody talk. I love this process, and I'm really enjoying it. And I know a lot of my colleagues in here are as well. You know, what I would like to ask everybody in here to do today is think, let's solve this problem. Let's don't kick it to the curb. Let's don't send it back with the negativity that, oh, it's going to get torn apart. Let's vote on something that we believe is a house. I told you the other day, 100 strong, that's what we are. On this particular bill, there's good and there's bad. You ate your meat, you ate your mashed potatoes, but you didn't eat the vegetables. Okay, that's fine. I like the vegetables, but I don't eat mashed potatoes. Okay? Maybe I should have used something else analogy, but that's what we had for dinner or lunch the other day. So, but you know, thank you. Look, I would like to ask everybody to think. We're not voting just yet, but we are in just a few. Think about what we can do. What difference can we make? What can we put out here? We've worked hard. We've worked together. Let's put something out here that works, that's fair, that helps a lot of people, helps our children, helps our teachers, helps those that would like to have a choice. So, Mr. Speaker, and to all my colleagues, with that being said, I am a firm yes on this bill. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 11th, Tuckett Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As has been stated during discussions over the past week and at interims last year, we have identified a need that faces our students and our teachers daily, and that is issues stemming from mental and behavioral health caused by alcohol, drugs, no parents at home, single parents, grandparents, foster parents, grandparents raising their grandchildren. This bill provides support for our teachers and help for our students. $24 million worth of help. That's a start. Think of prevention versus rehabilitation. What's that cost? I hope this bill will in some way lead us to a drug-free, educated workforce in West Virginia. I support this education bill because of the reasons I have mentioned above. Thank you.
The gentleman at 21st, Dr. Dean.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I just took a bite of cookie. I want to stand and support this bill today. As the original version came over from the Senate, I was a staunch opponent of the bill. There was lots of things in there I thought were harmful to our public education system, which doesn't perform as everybody is leading us to believe. When you look at how we educate students in low socioeconomic classes, we're doing a pretty good job. Is there room for improvement? Yes, there is. I think one of the most important tools in this bill to let us get to those improvements are the innovation zones. I was glad to see some funding allocated to those. I hope that the Senate leaves that provision in when it goes back and forth. I just want to say thank you to everyone who worked with us, worked on this. I know those of us in the Education Committee put several hours and long days in on this. And while we disagreed on lots of things, there were several things we did agree on. And I'm glad we were able to work together and come to a consensus on a bill that I can be comfortable voting for. Thank you.
The gentleman at 36, Doggett Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to follow up on and endorse the comments from the gentleman from the 1st District concerning the constitutional requirement for a single object. We are here today with what has been a monster bill for this body to be able to absorb and process, and it's been with, I would say, uneven results, certainly. The Constitution very clearly says that each idea shall be its own bill. Each bill must have a single object. You say, well, education. Well, we can do roads, education. We probably come up with 5 or 6 objects that we could put absolutely every single idea and bill into and force it through these 2 chambers. So what happened? We began with a monster bill from the Senate that surprised a lot of folks. Went to one committee, was worked on in education, and then it started to go to another committee, and when leadership saw that they didn't have the votes to get it out of that committee, they pulled it to the floor. Really a historic act to work the bill on the floor as a committee would. And they could have hearings, they could have people come in, they could have experts interviewed on the floor. All those things happened. They worked probably dawn till dusk and late, got the bill over here. And what we do is, and appropriately, and I saluted the speaker early in the process, we sent it to committees. First Education, which did an incredible job. I think that if anything, last night's proceedings on amendments show that the Education Committee did an incredible job of turning a horrible bill into one that was workable and at least had some provisions in it that were beneficial. And then it goes to Finance, and the House Finance Committee does an interesting thing. Everyone knows that you can't go to the 3rd level of amendments. And as the Speaker did last night, he would say the principal amendment, which was the Education Amendment, and then you had the secondary amendment. You can't go to 3rd level. So when we were in House Finance, we arrive at 8 o'clock in the morning on Monday, have 2 hours of hearings. The folks who spoke were allowed, I think, 70 seconds. We went in, we heard conversation from out-of-state lobbyists, concerning charter schools and education savings accounts. We worked on the bill that was presented to us as the House Finance staff amendment to the Education Amendment, as it turns out. Well, anyway, we go through, and at 5:30 we have another hearing. We go for 2 hours, and the people there are allowed, I think, 90 seconds to speak. And for the folks who didn't get to see it, basically people mid-sentence, light would come on, they'd be pushed off the stage. So, but we did get some very valuable comments. I thought it was good to sit through those hearings. So then we go upstairs and we start working. And as is always the case, there's a motion for the House Finance Committee amendment to be approved so that we can then work it. Well, it went through and was voted. And the Democratic members had amendments planned and written to the House Finance version. Lo and behold, we were at 3rd level of amendments. We were barred from offering amendments. I've never seen it in all my years here as a member and also as counsel for and 4 sessions to committees. So what it meant was that you could not amend the House Finance version of the bill, the one that had been worked on and had been discussed and presented to us. The council had explained the bill. I mean, we'd worked the thing up, but we were not able to because instead of the usual practice of only introducing the House Finance Amendment to the committee for approval, the education bill was presented first as the primary amendment. Then when House Finance was approved, we were at third level of amendments. Now, to the chair's credit, when it was all done and there was we had to adjourn for a while, people were in shock, he said, you certainly have the right to make amendments. We will go ahead and proceed with amendments in committee, but the amendments have to be to the education bill. You can't amend the House Finance Amendment because that would be third level. So we had worked the bill all day long and that we couldn't do anything with. So the vote came around and the House Finance Amendment was defeated with no amendments, and that brought the Education Amendment as voted onto the floor. So it's really a kind of a contorted way for the Education Amendment in toto. I don't think there were any changes other than maybe some just some technical changes. It comes to the floor, and lo and behold, just like in the Senate yesterday, we had a committee of the whole. I mean, we were here, I don't know, from 11 o'clock until, 10:30 or something last night, doing amendment after amendment after amendment after amendment. And you know what? The process probably looked like what the Senate did. And you say, well, how do we get here? The way we get here is because of the bill covering every subject imaginable in regard to education, by violating the constitutional requirement of a single purpose, one idea. And so today, people are making very good comments about this bill, saying, gee, but it's got something in there. And in Congress, they call it a Christmas tree. This bill is a Christmas tree. There are all kinds of ornaments on it, and there's something in the shiny brightness of it that everybody will love. One thing or two things. That's the reason you don't want to violate the single purpose requirement of the Constitution, because of the Christmas tree effect that you get. So the size of the bill not only changes the nature of it and how it's presented to us. I'm presented today with a very difficult vote, and it's because of the size of the bill. If each idea were presented, I'd have no trouble. I know my position on charter schools, and I know my position on pay raise and different items. But when you get the Christmas tree in front of you, do you have enough votes of some ideas to get the thing passed? So we're confronted with that, and that's the position we're in, and it's because of the monster bill that has been presented to us. And you say, but it came from the Senate, Larry. It's we didn't invent this thing. Yes, but we have had some pretty big bills over here in the last 4 or 5 years that involve many more than single objects. So, and you say, well, but we kind of take care of a lot of things. Yeah, but one of the interesting things that happened last night was we ended up with a $202 million bill because we were able to add in things that are good ideas to the bill. And so if this bill passes, then we're going to have to come up with $202 million. So I'm surprised that ticket has been on the floor. I don't think it would have come out of finance where the money amounts would have been specifically reviewed one by one. So, Mr. Speaker, I would just say that I think that we're confronted with a difficult vote today, and that vote is because we're dealing with a bill that covers too many subjects and is unconstitutional at its core. This is the greatest decision-making body and institution in the world, and because it's considered in 2 different houses, it's considered by 2 different power structures, and whenever it's one idea at a time, I think we come up with a pretty good result. We ought to consider the pay raise separate from the seniority provisions, separate from charter schools, and so on down the line. So, Mr. Speaker, in regard to process and decision-making and the requirements of the Constitution, I will vote no.
The gentleman at 6, Doug Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've heard a lot of talk today about kids, about the children, and about teachers. And I just want to say that people that touched my life most were teachers, public school teachers, who saw something in me that at times I didn't see in myself, who said you can be whatever you want to be and you can go wherever you want to go. So for those teachers, I say thank you. I would suspect that many of them are watching and listening to us today. We had a spirited debate here yesterday. We did. And I have to say that when I came in these chambers yesterday, I wasn't sure. I didn't know. And I listened, and I processed, and I talked to people. And then the delegate from the 55th got my attention. And I know they say the fiscal note on that's going to be expensive. But I want to remind the folks in here today that this is the one-year anniversary of the Parkland shooting in Florida. And what price would we pay? So I thank the gentleman from the 55th. I have a son-in-law who's a resource officer. And he's not just a deputy sheriff, he's their friend. He's their confidant. He's the one they run to when they need something. I have a grandson. Somebody on the over here mentioned dyslexia. I have a grandson who the Tyler County school system literally saved because they tested him and found out that that was his issue. And they're helping him. And they've got him on the right track now to get him the help he needs. And I'm thankful that a teacher saw that need in my grandson. I just want to say, Mr. Speaker, you knew my concerns with the Senate bill from day one. And the Speaker graciously opened his office to me to let me come in and sit down. And I appreciate that, sir. I appreciate that. I hope today, some of you may be on the fence like I was yesterday. Some of you may be wondering, what do we do? I hope that we can put together bipartisan support for this bill that will send a clear message to the Senate that we do want true reform. We do want to see something good come out of this to help our teachers, but most of all, to help our students. Thank you, and Mr. Speaker, I support the bill.
The gentleman from the 61st, Doug Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to support Senate Bill 451, and I can tell you when it came over for the Senate, I didn't think this is the speech I would be giving. But I do want to give credit to the Education Committee for their hard work, for members on both sides of the aisle that put in hours and hours to make this bill better. You know, this bill includes a pay raise for teachers and school service personnel. It includes a bonus for missing 4 or less days. It provides a tax credit to our educators. None of the things that they ask for, but all the things that they deserve. This bill provides for more counselors, mental health professionals, and nurses in our schools. Thanks to the gentleman from the 55th, a resource officer in every classroom, or I'm sorry, in every school. It provides net enrollment of 1,400 to help small counties with their fixed costs. This bill keeps more local tax dollars in our counties, gives the counties the flexibility to pay their educators and school service personnel more money. This bill does not include ESAs. It does, however, provide for 2 charter schools in West Virginia, or at least the potential for 2 charter schools, with watered-down language requiring that 2 low-performing elementary schools would be the only ones to qualify. A majority of parents and employees must vote in favor of that conversion. Now, one of my friends mentioned that this could be bait. Well, it could be. But when I looked at the vote last night on the amendment that expanded charter schools from 2 to 5, it went down overwhelmingly 59 to 40. And I have confidence in this House that we're going to hold our position, that we're going to pass this bill today to do a lot of good things for public education in West Virginia. And if the Senate sends us back another Christmas tree with a bunch of ugly ornaments, we're going to shut it down. So for that reason, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to vote in favor of this bill, again, because it does great things for public education. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 16th, Doug Linville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill has at times divided this House. This bill has at times divided supporters of each and every one of us, I believe, in this room. I look back as I began my run for office, and I reached out to the gentleman from the 17th. And when I spoke with him, I said, look, I'm going to run for this, but the one thing that I'll never do is bow to any sort of party pressure. I won't bow to pressure from anyone. And he said that the expectation is that you would come up here and you would vote your conscience and you would vote your district. And that's exactly what I intend to do today. I intend to vote my conscience and vote my district. Gentleman from the 36th over here, who I agreed with on some things yesterday, I find a few issues with some of the logic. I hold my oath to this Constitution for the state of West Virginia and into the United States in the absolute highest regard. And I'd like to draw the body's attention to another bill that relates very generally to one topic, but it's the one that we pass every single year. That's the budget. The budget relates generally to spending the funds of the taxpayer, generally. And in it, there are thousands of line items. There are thousands of projects funded. In it, there are things that have very disparate meanings, that have disparate aims, but it all relates generally to spending the money of the taxpayer. So to call this bill unconstitutional doesn't pass muster for me. Ladies and gentlemen, when I look at voting my district, I look at $5.5 million more for Cabell County schools. I look at Huntington, West Virginia, which has been the center of the opioid epidemic, and I look at 400 new professional mental health workers across this state. I look at this and I see a pay raise for our teachers. I look at this and I see an incentive for math teachers to stay in this state. I see a $1,000 bonus for folks to stay in the classroom and to make the decisions that are best for them. I also see $40 million or $40.5 million to put a police officer in every single school. It's probably very fitting that today is the anniversary of the Parkland shooting. I didn't realize that to the gentleman from the 6th. But if we can do one good thing, if this is about the kids, for that reason alone, I support this bill. And I urge every one of my colleagues to look at it through that lens and support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 59th, Doug Kump.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Great googly moogly. I call the question.
Gentleman from the 59th has moved the previous question. Is the demand sustained? The demand is sustained. Roll calls. The question before the House is, shall debate now terminate on Senate Bill 451? Those in favor of ordering the previous question will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, 33 ayes, 65 nays, 2 members absent not voting, less than a majority present having voted in the affirmative. Chair declares the previous question lost. The gentleman from the 8th, Doug Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I want to compliment this body on sending this bill through the complete committee process of both the Education and the Finance Committees. I think it is a testimony to your leadership and the proper consideration of legislation. The first thing I would like to address is the objections that seem to have been raised from the gentleman from the 3rd and the gentleman from the 36th concerning the single object of a bill. This bill, Senate Bill 451, deals with a comprehensive education reform. I was in this body in 2001 when we had House Bill 102. Let me tell you what was included in this bill proposed by former Governor Wise. It went into Article 21, which gave senior citizens a personal income tax break. Then it went into Article 2, had a pay raise for state police. Then it went into Article 18A and had a pay raise for teachers. Then it went into Article 22 and provided for the present limited video lottery around the state. At that point, the minority raised concerns about the single object, and we were told by the majority it was okay, and it is now the law of the land today. I'll move on to something else. We were given a comparison that we all have on our desk. And I went down a checklist of the House Education and Finance Strike and Insert amendments and looked, and I find probably 85% of the things that are included in this legislation that I think are good for the students of this state, good for the citizens of this state. If I go a little bit further, Mr. Speaker, when we had the state superintendent of schools before the House Finance Committee, and I asked him questions at that particular point in time. And my question was, in this state, the student population was down 4,000 to 5,000 students from this school year compared to the previous school year. And I asked the state superintendent, can you tell me what was the cause of this? Did we graduate more than we had coming into our school system? Well, he couldn't tell me. And I informed the state superintendent that can you tell me why we were down? The student population down? Do we have people moving out of state? Do we have people, and really he doesn't collect that data. And I asked him the question, how many people do we have possibly that have chosen to remove their students from the public school system and either choose to homeschool or put them in a parochial school or a private Christian school? We're constitutionally bound as a legislature to see that that every child in this state gets a thorough and efficient education. But the State Department of Education does not collect that data. I would like to know if we have this exodus from the public schools of this state and what the reasoning might be. I suggested to the superintendent, you might want to, through the WVEIS system, have an exit interview when a student is leaving and find out why they are leaving. And that would be valuable data that this state legislature could use in making some of the decisions we have had to make in Senate Bill 451. But that data is not available. Perhaps we need to command the state superintendent through legislation or strong suggestion that we might collect that data. We have the computer system capable of doing it, so it would be data that would be valuable to us. But as I look at this bill, it provides additional protections for students. It provides some opportunity for this state to offer parents a limited amount of choice, and with 2 limited charter schools. I, as a retired educator, do not see charter schools as being that problematic because I don't think, given the rural nature of this state, they're going to fly in a lot of places. And in areas where there is a need, perhaps that is a viable alternative, because in charter schools, this bill will authorize private, or not private charter schools, but ones under the control of the local Board of Education. If it fits in a given community, then I think it's appropriate for us to at least look at that as an alternative. And given the fact I do not agree with the previous assertions of the constitutionality of this, given the past precedent in this state, I believe that this is a bill that affords teachers a deserved pay raise, and I will support this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 55th, Douglas Spinagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When this bill first came over and I moved to PPI, it said it was a pig. Well, we've done a pretty good job of slaughtering this pig. So I'm inclined to vote yes here in just a little bit. I'm going to tell you why. What the Senate sent over to us, non-severability clause, that got gutted. Paycheck protection, that got gutted. County administrators becoming at-will employees, that got gutted. We preserved seniority. We took out ESAs. We eliminated unlimited charter schools. We did leave 2, which I'm not a fan of as a pilot program. That gives me some heartburn. We took out no pay during work stoppages, and we allowed for our students to go ahead and play for extracurricular activities. We put in school counselors' primary purpose to support students with academic, social, and emotional needs, and 80% of their time is required to do that. We increased the year-end bonus from $500 to $1,000. We increased the $250 tax credit for school supplies for teachers and school service personnel. Now, I'm not a fan of the levy, of the potential of raising everybody's real estate taxes throughout the state. And I'm not a fan of the charter schools being a pilot program for 2. And then yesterday, the amendment that I had offered and this body overwhelmingly passed, we have a law enforcement officer in every school in this state. This bill does a lot of good. I have heartburn, frankly, over the levy and over the charter schools, but those 2 issues, me personally, I think it's a good bill. Problem is Senate Bill 451, the way it came across, got a bad reputation right out of the chute. And now we're having to sit here and clean it up, and there's misconceptions out there throughout the general public of what is in this bill and what is not in this bill, because that's just what happens. It's been my experience down here, when you get a bad bill with a bad reputation, you're better to trash it and start a new on another one. And if we would have had the House process do that, minus, the charter school position, I think everybody in the state probably be jumping up and down and say, pass this piece of legislation. So I'm willing to give it a chance. I'm going to be voting yes, particularly because of every officer in school. I will say this, just me personally, if it comes back over here of any more fooling around with the charter school provision, I will be a no, and I will be loud about it. If it comes back over here and we try to gut or basically eliminate having a law officer in every school in this state, I will be against it and be loud about it. But I'm going to put my faith in the Speaker to hold the House's position in conference, try to put together a strong, comprehensive bill that we can pass. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The lady from the 49th for a request pursuant to Rule 49.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My daughter is a West Virginia teacher, so I request Rule 49.
Many members of this House have expressed similar factual situations to the chair over the course of the last 48 hours. All members who find themselves similarly situated should now ring in with your recognition light. The clerk will make a note of it. All members who wish a ruling by the chair pursuant to Rule 49 under the factual situation as described by the lady from the 49th, namely that you or a family member have some connection to any part of this bill that may be perceived to have a financial benefit, should ring in now with your recognition light. The clerk will note your desire for a ruling pursuant to Rule 49. Got 'em. Members may turn the lights off at this time. Ruling by the chair is that all members who sought recognition would constitute a class far larger than 5, and all members are therefore directed to vote. Gentleman from the 48th, Douglas Hamrick, to close debate on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we've probably or hopefully had our longest discussion of this session on this bill. We've talked about it, like I said last night, we talked about it 3 days in education, a couple days in finance, and then spent quite a long time yesterday and today discussing this bill, and every member has had the ability to have input on this piece of legislation. I think where we are now, we have a bill that the majority of this House can support, and I would just urge you all to support the legislation today. Mr. Speaker, I do urge passage.
Question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, 71 ayes, 29 nays, 0 members absent not voting. More than a majority of the members elected having voted in the affirmative, Chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 451.
Are there amendments to the title?
The Committee on Finance moves to amend the title.
Gentleman 64th, Douglas Householder.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to withdraw the title amendment.
Gentleman from the 64th asks unanimous consent that the title amendment offered by the Committee on Finance be withdrawn. Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Title amendment withdrawn. Are there further title amendments?
Delegate Householder moves to amend the title.
Question before the House is adoption of the title amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it. The title amendment is adopted. Clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Request concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2173, allowing state and federal law enforcement officers to testify as to the contents and evidence of a wiretap or electronic surveillance.
Lady in the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to table the bill.
Lady in the 49th moves that committee substitute for House Bill 2173 be laid upon the table. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Bill is laid upon the table. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2338, allowing the owner of an antique military vehicle to display alternate registration insignia.
Gentleman from 56, Douglas Howell, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of this bill is to exempt antique military vehicles from displaying a registration plate if the plate would alter the vehicle's original military markings. To keep the original markings intact, the Division of Motor Vehicles will issue an alternative registration so the vehicle may retain its accurate historical markings. I urge passage.
Question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? The gentleman from the first, Delegate McGinn.
Chair, yield, please.
Chair does yield.
Can you just rephrase or restate the purpose of the bill real quick?
Those with antique military vehicles want to keep them original looking. They did not have license plates on them. The registration number was painted on the bumpers. So what the state would do is essentially you would get a personalized antique license plate and then paint that number on the bumpers as the military did when they were in service, and they would keep the plate in the vehicle.
Okay. Any fiscal note to this?
Actually, it would be positive, but we didn't get one.
Okay. Thank you for this wonderful bill.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, the question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, 98 ayes, 1 nay, 1 member absent not voting. More than a majority of members present having voted in the affirmative. Chair declares the bill passed. Clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2338.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, title as read by the clerk will be and arraign the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Request concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2359 relating to exemptions to the commercial driver's license requirements.
Gentleman 56, Douglas Howell, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of this bill is to create a restricted commercial driver's license for operators employed in the farm service industry. The restricted license is valid for 180 consecutive days in a 12-month period. I urge passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, 99 ayes, 0 nays, 1 member absent, not voting. Majority of those present having voted in the affirmative. Chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2359.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Request concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2673, creating the Oil and Gas Abandoned Well Plugging Fund.
Gentleman from the 10th, gentleman from the 8th, Douglas Anderson, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This committee substitute exempts the severance tax on oil and gas produced from low-producing wells to reduce the cost of production, and then it imposes a separate fee for operating these wells. The bill uses the fee for the purpose to plug abandoned wells that are without a responsible owner. These wells are pollution risks in the state, and between 4,000 and 5,000 of them exist throughout the state. The bill creates a tax exemption for wells producing natural gas at an average levels less than 60,000 cubic feet of natural gas per day. This is the level under federal law that is set in federal law, and we want to match ours in sync with the federal law. The current exemption is 5,000 cubic feet of natural gas per day. The bill also creates a tax exemption for wells producing oil at average levels of less than 10 barrels per day. The current exemption is 1/2 barrel per day. This bill also exempts operators from filing severance tax returns for wells producing less than the exemption levels. The second part of the bill replaces the tax with a fee of 2.5% of gross proceeds calculated as though it were a severance tax up to the exemption levels. The current severance tax rate is 5%. The fee is paid into a new fund known as the Oil and Gas Abandoned Well Plugging Fund, which will be administered by the Department of Environmental Protection and used only to plug orphaned oil and gas wells. On June 1st, 2021, and any June 1st thereafter, if the newly created fund has a balance of more than $4 million, the 2.5% fee is suspended for the following calendar year. The DEP then must spend the money to plug wells or temporarily lose that revenue stream. The bill requires the DEP to report every year regarding the balance of the new fund and its sister fund known as the Oil and Gas Reclamation Fund. The report will also include the number of wells plugged in the previous year and a 5-year plan to plug wells in the future. I urge passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? Jump from the 51st, Elgin Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the chairman just stated, this bill does two things. The second aspect of this bill, which was just described, which creates a fund to start to do a better job at plugging orphan oil and gas wells, is something that we really need to move on in West Virginia because we have thousands of those wells that are not being reclaimed. But one thing that I think we need to recognize about this bill when we consider whether to vote yes or no is the impact on the severance tax. And what this bill does is it exempts about 22,000 additional oil and gas wells from the severance tax. That's a lot of wells, 22,000 oil and gas wells. That's, according to the fiscal note, about 7 or 8% of natural gas production in the state, and that's about 15% of oil production in the state that would be exempted from paying severance taxes. That's a lot. And those severance taxes are important, not just for us here in state government, but a portion of those severance taxes go back to our local governments all across the state.
And according to the fiscal note, there's an impact of about $13.5 million in lost revenues, and of that, about $1.5 million of lost revenues to counties and cities and towns in your districts. And so for that reason, I will be voting against this bill.
The gentleman to the 7th, Dr. Harshbarger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request a Rule 49 due to employment.
Is the gentleman's concerned that he is employed in the natural gas industry?
Yes.
The ruling by the chair would be that the gentleman would be a class of much larger than 5 and therefore would be directed to vote.
Okay, thank you.
Gentleman 35th, Dr. Capito.
Same request, Mr. Speaker, as the gentleman from the 7th.
Same factual situation? Same
Yes,
ruling,
sir.
Same ruling by the chair. The gentleman's directed to vote. Gentleman 13th, Dr. Cadle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would encourage everyone to vote for this bill, and I'll tell you why. These small wells are about, I think, 3%. I think the gentleman's wrong, but I won't argue. Anyway, the big Marcellus wells producing 11 to 14 million cubic feet of gas a day. These small wells are producing, say, 300 cubic feet a day. The price of gas has fallen so much because of the volume those wells put out that the guys that drilled in the 60s and 70s, 50s even, those old wells don't produce enough revenue for these guys to stay in business. That's what this is all about. If they go under, we, the state, the people, will have to plug all those wells. So we better keep this thing alive until these guys go, the wells finish production, and then they can plug them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 10th, Dr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we've discussed these older wells, both in offices and in committees, one of the things I'd like to bring to folks' attention, if you live in a rural area and your property has free gas, you have that free gas because of these older wells that are slowly deteriorating and going away. So by exempting what we're trying to do here, we're trying to prop up these smaller producers, give them an opportunity to put a little bit more finances in those wells, keep them operating, and keep rural areas in natural gas that they would otherwise not have. So I support this move. I support this bill, and I ask that the members of this body also support it. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 43rd, Doug Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request Rule 49 as my father works in natural gas pipeline construction.
Yes, as the gentleman has explained the factual situation, he would be a member of a class of greater than 5 and would therefore be directed to vote. Does the gentleman from the 8th, Doug Anderson, wish to close debate?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The gas production from these old vertical wells are approximately 7% of the gas production in the state. This bill, if we continue to lose wells in this state and the producers do not have the funds to maintain them, to keep them swabbed, to keep the gas flowing, people in some parts of the state, this is the only means with which they have to heat their homes. And if these wells cease to be produced, they will lose that source of heat. In many places, the utilities from the major utility companies are not available. They depend upon the free gas in their lease to keep their homes heated. It is important to keep these wells in operations for the reason other speakers have addressed, and that is if a company fails and goes into bankruptcy, they will no longer be able to maintain the wells for the free gas for folks, but a complete bankruptcy and the inability to plug wells will put an even greater burden upon this state to deal with abandoned wells. We have between 4,000 and 5,000 that need plugged now. This will create a revenue stream to address that specific purpose. The rapid growth of the Marcellus and Utica drilling in this state and the almost exponential growth of gas production is constantly increasing the severance tax coming in from oil and natural gas. But this small niche inheritance from the past needs some ability to be able to stay in business, or we're going to create a greater burden of abandoned wells. People in some rural areas will lose their free gas. That is why, Mr. Speaker, I brought this bill to the floor of the House, and again, I urge its passage. Thank you.
Question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result of this question. 89 ayes, 11 nays, 0 members absent not voting. More than a majority of those present having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2673.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, title as read by the clerk will be in the reading the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
House Bill 2709 relating to hunting licenses.
The gentleman from the 35th, Dr. Capito, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In West Virginia, when we apply for a hunting license or a stamp, we provide certain information to the DNR, such as our name and address and other sorts of contact information. This bill is very simple. All it does is provide that information that you provide to the DNR cannot be disclosed under the Freedom of Information Act, commonly known as FOIA. So that is the bill. I would provide actually one caveat. The information can be obtained by a law enforcement agency or other governmental entity, pursuant to rules that are existing. But otherwise, it's not disclosable under the Freedom of Information Act. That's the bill, and I urge its passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are the members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result of this question. 100 ayes, 0 nays, 0 members absent not voting. A majority of those present having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
House Bill 2709.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, the title as read by the clerk will be in the reading the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2715 relating to Class Q special hunting permit for disabled persons.
The gentleman from the 27th, Dr. Schott, to explain the bill. Dr. Capito to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd ask unanimous consent to offer a technical amendment on third reading.
Gentleman from the 35th, ask unanimous consent to offer an amendment on third reading. Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to change it up, happy Valentine's Day to everybody. This amendment is very, very technical. As you'll recall, yesterday on this bill, we amended in to allow for chiropractic physicians. So if you'll follow me on page 2, if you would like, on line 20, that sentence will now read, a licensed physician, physician assistant, advanced practice registered nurse, or chiropractic physician, and that's the crux of the technical amendment. I'll move back to the bill now. Essentially, this bill is fairly technical, and so
Delegate, we should dispose of the amendment first. The question before the House is the adoption of the technical amendment as just explained by the gentleman from the 35th. The amendment is debatable. Are the members who wish to speak to the adoption of the amendment? Does the gentleman from the 27th, Dr. Porterfield, wish to speak to the amendment?
Ask for Rule 49 because I'm totally blind and I've been known to hunt. So that's all.
The question before the House is on the amendment, Delegate, but to the extent there would be any application to you, you'd be a member of a class of greater than 5 and therefore should vote. Are there other members who wish to speak to the adoption of the amendment as explained by the gentleman from the 35th? If not, those in favor of the amendment will say aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it, and the amendment as explained by the gentleman from the 35th is adopted. Clerk will read the bill a third time.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2715 relating to Class Q special hunting permit for disabled persons.
The gentleman from the 35th, Dr. Capito, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and apologies to my friends for jumping ahead there. Under current, again, this law deals with Class Q licenses, which hunting licenses, which allow for folks that are permanently disabled in their lower extremities to obtain a license to hunt from a vehicle. And what we're doing with this bill is we're expanding that class of folks that can qualify under a Class Q permit. If you'll forgive me, I'm going to read, but I promise not to read in full, but I will summarize the class of folks that we're adding under a Class Q license. This would be for, in addition to someone whose lower extremities are disabled, we're adding permanent or irreversible physical disability that prevents that individual to ambulate without a wheelchair, walker, crutches, or other prosthesis. B, multiple conditions that result in a 90% loss of lower extremity use. C, deals with a lung condition that would prevent that person from breathing and moving without the use of a vehicle to hunt. And then the fourth is a cardiovascular disease that would essentially have the same effect. The applicant's disability must be certified by a licensed physician or a physician's assistant, or, of course, a chiropractic physician, or advanced practice registered nurse. Mr. Speaker, I urge passage of the bill.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? The gentleman from the first, Doug McGinn.
Yeah, will Chair yield, Vice Chair?
Gladly.
Was there a definition in here for the loss of a lower extremity? So I was just curious.
Well, I think that would be in the discretion of.
Okay.
In the discretion of the physician, I think it would be. I'm not sure if there's a technical definition.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, the question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result on this question. 100 ayes, 0 nays, 0 members absent not voting. A majority of those present having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2715.
Are there amendments to the title? If not,
Delegate Schott moves to amend the title.
Okay, the question before the House is adoption of the title amendment. Those in favor of the title amendment will say aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it, and chair declares the title amendment adopted. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
House Bill 2739, relating to contributions on behalf of employees to a retirement plan administered by the Consolidated Public Retirement Board.
The gentleman from the 9th, Doug Holland, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon. The purpose of this bill is to amend the provisions of the West Virginia Code relating to the failure of employers to make required contributions to the retirement funds administered by the CPRB. If an employer fails to make a payment for a period of 60 days after the payment is due, the employer would be considered delinquent. The CPRB would certify this delinquency to the state auditor, the county commission, and the sheriff of the county wherein the employer is located, who would then withhold any money due the employer by the state or county until the delinquency, including interest, is satisfied. Monies withheld are to be paid to the applicable retirement system on behalf of the employer. The CPRB is required to provide notice to the employer 30 days prior to certifying delinquency. This bill would also amend the provisions of the West Virginia Code relating to the crime of the failure of employers to provide benefits for the employees. This bill adds a new subsection which creates a new misdemeanor offense for any person who is responsible for ensuring an entity complies with the requirements of a retirement plan administered by the CPRB and knowingly and willfully fails to make employer or employee contributions to a retirement plan for a period of 60 days after the payment is due. Penalty for conviction of this offense is a fine of not less than $100, no more than $500, or confinement in jail for not more than 6 months or both. In addition, conviction of this misdemeanor offense is prima facie evidence of official misconduct. Just to note that this same bill was passed both chambers last year, and the only reason it didn't make it downstairs because it ran out of session before the title amendment was taken up, and I urge passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, 100 ayes, 0 nays, 0 members absent not voting. Majority of those present having voted in the affirmative, chair declares the bill passed. Clerk will please report the title.
House Bill 2739.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Request concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
House Bill 2743, eliminating reference to municipal policemen's pension and relief funds and firemen's pension and relief funds in section restricting investment.
Lady from 38th, Delegate Graves, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of this bill is to delete a reference to municipal policemen's pension and relief funds or the municipal firemen's pension and relief funds as to investments of pension funds of municipalities, as a restriction on such funds are contained in another section. This is really a technical cleanup. It is a duplicative reference that we are eliminating, and I urge its passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, 100 ayes, 0 nays, 0 members absent not voting. Majority of those present having voted in the affirmative. Chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
House Bill 2743.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Request concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2761, modernizing the self-service storage lien law.
The gentleman from the 27th, Doug Schott, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning, or good afternoon, I guess it is. In Chapter 38 of our code is located the Self-Service Storage Lien Act, which basically provides that a storage facility operator has a lien on personal property stored within that facility for agreed rent, labor, and other charges and expenses reasonably incurred when the operator sells or disposes of the property left in a unit. What we have before us, 2761, modifies the term of the Self-Service Storage Lien Act, which has not been modified for the past 18 years. These changes are intended to conform with other states and to better reflect the current industry practices. Among those changes, the self-storage lien now includes and applies to late fees. The owner may charge a monthly late fee of not to exceed $20. The current rate is $10, or 20% of the monthly rental fee, whichever is the greater, and the current limit is 10%. And that's for each month that the occupant defaults for a period of 5 days or more. The default notice can be given by hand delivery, verified mail, or electronic mail, and the term verified mail is defined as any method of mailing that is offered by the United States Postal Service or a private delivery service that provides evidence of mailing. The notice of a sale of property may now be given by any of the following methods. One, in a newspaper of general circulation in the jurisdiction where the sale is to be held or where the facility is located, or by electronic mail or text, or on an online website. But those can only be used as long as the tenant has been notified of those methods in the rental agreement. Rather than having to go through the DMV process for selling a titled vehicle, such as a motor vehicle or watercraft, to enforce the lien, the facility owner now has the option, in addition to that process, to have the vehicle, watercraft, or trailer towed when the rent is at least 60 days past due. The towing company would then have to comply with the DMV process for selling the titled vehicle. The sale of the property itself may now be held at the self-service storage facility where the personal property is stored, or an online auction website, or at any other location reasonably determined by the operator. That's a summary of the modifications to the law. Mr. Speaker, I urge its passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, 88 ayes, 12 nays, 0 members absent not voting. Majority of those present having voted in the affirmative, chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2761.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. Lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the bill take effect July 1st, 2019.
Lady from the 49th moves the bill be made effective July 1st, 2019. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result on this question. 96 ayes, 4 nays, 0 members absent, not voting. 2/3 of those elected having voted in the affirmative. Chair declares the bill effective July 1st, 2019. Clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2793, expanding applicability of educational facilities for the West Virginia College prepaid tuition and savings program.
Gentleman from the 10th, Dr. Chris, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon. This bill will amend the provisions of the West Virginia Code relating to West Virginia College Prepaid Tuition and Savings Program Act. The bill will add 2 eligible education institutions where monies from a savings plan may be used to include private or religious primary, middle, or secondary schools. Current law includes only an institution of higher education. The bill would also add the superintendent of the West Virginia Department of Education to the board of the College Prepaid Tuition and Savings Program. I urge passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? The gentleman from the 58th, Dr. Coles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My wife and I send our children to private Christian school, and this bill has a direct financial impact for us, and I would ask under Rule 49 to be excused from voting.
The gentleman is a member of a class of greater than 5 and would be directed to vote. The gentleman from the 30th, Dr. Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the gentleman from the 10th yield for just a quick question?
Gentleman does yield.
Yes, sir.
Is this kind of like an ESA, an education savings account?
No, it's an expansion, I think, as the treasurer explained it, I think, of the 521 account.
But this would allow me to put, on a tax-preferred basis, some money into an account to pay for private and schooling outside of the public education system.
I think
and
so.
there'd be no public monies would go into these accounts.
No public monies.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr.
The gentleman from the 28th, Dr. Pack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask for Rule 49.
Under the factual situation as described by the gentleman from the 58th?
Yes, sir.
If the same factual situation, the ruling of the chair would be the same. The gentleman should vote. The gentleman from the 40th, Dr. Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to request for Rule 49.
Same factual situation?
Yes, sir.
Ruling of the chair would be the same. The gentleman's a member of a class of greater than 5 and should vote. Are there other members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, the question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, 100 ayes, 0 nays, 0 members absent, not voting. Majority of those present having voted in the affirmative. Chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2793.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Request concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2821, updating provisions for command, clerical, and other pay.
The gentleman from the 10th, Dr. Chris, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bill will amend the provisions of the West Virginia Code relating to the command and clerical pay for certain members of the National Guard. The bill amends the provisions to provide that the commander and not the headquarter are to receive various sums of money outlined in the bill. The amounts of the pay do not change. It rewrites the current provisions regarding to how the Adjutant General is to determine the amount of any entitlement to pay under the sections eliminating limitations and requirements, and authorizes the Adjutant General to determine the amount without limitation other than by approval of the governor. The authorizing the Adjutant General to increase the amount that may be paid beyond the statutory amounts provided out of available funds, if any are available, but not more than twice the statutory amounts. Mr. Speaker, I urge passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result of this question. 98 ayes, 2 nays, 0 members absent, not voting. Majority of those present having voted in the affirmative. Chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2821.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate to action of the House and the Senate. Request concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2848 relating to the West Virginia ABLE Act.
Gentleman from the 10th, Dr. Chris, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hopefully this will be the last one I do today. The bill will amend provisions of the West Virginia Code relating to the savings accounts created pursuant of the Achieving a Better Life Experience in West Virginia Act, or ABLE accounts. The bill will amend the definition section by adding definitions for the terms ABLE Act and attorney in fact. Eligible individual is amended to take out specific age requirements of 26 by when the disability must have occurred, but instead uses the age requirements that is in the federal ABLE Act, which is currently 26. The bill would authorize a parent or an attorney to open and manage an ABLE account for the beneficiary who lacks capacity to enter in a contract. Current law allows only beneficiaries, conservators, and guardians to open and manage accounts. The bill specifically excludes the DHHR from being eligible to manage an account. The Federal Employer Identification Number is required of the person or entity opening or managing an ABLE account on behalf of a beneficiary. The bill would remove the current provisions which allow monies in an ABLE account to be subject to a claim by Medicaid after the beneficiary's death, and instead states that money in the account as well qualified withdrawals are to be disregarded for purposes of determining eligibility for public assistance, are not subject to claims by HHR, and upon death of the beneficiary, any monies left in the account would be transferred to the estate of the beneficiary, unless any of those things are prohibited by federal law. Lastly, the bill creates a new exemption from federal adjusted gross income for the purposes of calculating West Virginia personal income tax equal to the amounts contributed to an ABLE account, but only to the extent of the amount, and is not allowed as a deduction in determining federal adjusted gross income in the first place. Any unusual amount may be carried forward to the next 5 years. In addition, amounts deposited in the ABLE account, which are withdrawn, are not usually not used for a qualified disability expense, but are to be added to the federal adjusted gross income for use in determining the West Virginia personal income tax liability. I urge passage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? The gentleman from the 67th, Doug Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield?
Gentleman does yield.
Yes, sir.
Don't you think you need an extra word on either line 6 or line 9? Either a or the in
no,
either
sir, I
place?
don't think so. I don't think so.
Do you want me to make a speech and say that I need it to you? That you need it? Yeah, you've struck out don't you realize you've struck out a the and not replaced it? You've gone directly to designated beneficiary.
Just a minute.
Bottom of the first one. Mm-hmm. Line 6 or line 9 of the bill. It's whatever's on the screen here. Either line 6 or line 9. You begin the strike on line 6, and the first word struck is the. And then when you go down to line 9 and you insert designated beneficiary. It'll say means designated beneficiary. And do you not really mean a or the designated beneficiary?
According to council, we don't need it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, 100 ayes, 0 nays, 0 members absent not voting. A majority of those present having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2848.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, title as read by the clerk will be in the remaining title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
House Bill 2992 relating to governmental websites.
Lady from 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to postpone action 1 day.
Lady in the 49th, action unanimous consent to postpone action 1 day. Is there objection? Chair hears no objection. Are there further bills on third reading? Bills on second reading.
Senate Bill 377 relating to minimum wage and maximum hour standards.
Are there amendments?
The Committee on the Judiciary moves to amend the bill.
The gentleman from 27th, Delegate Schott, to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the strike and insert of the amendment from the Committee on the Judiciary. It basically just makes some corrections in terms initially that were referred to as maximum wage, which should have been maximum hour. That's all it does. I urge adoption of the committee strike and insert amendment.
Are there amendments to the amendment?
Delegate Lovejoy moves to amend the amendment.
Does the gentleman from 17th, Delegate Lovejoy, wish to explain the secondary amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of this amendment is to strike subsection 8 from the list of exceptions to the minimum wage for West Virginia workers. Specifically, I seek to remove from this list of exceptions an often overlooked group of West Virginians, and that's our workers with mental and physical disabilities. By way of history, the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act, on which this act is based, was enacted about 80 years ago. At the time, it was hailed as a landmark piece of legislation. It included minimum wage, overtime protection, child labor standards. But it did, however, include an exception, it has been carried into our law, for minimum wage to be paid to workers with certain mental and physical handicaps. So at the time, perhaps it was to incentivize the hiring of these individuals, but I submit that it's now time to revisit the policy some 80 years later. The policy reflects a set of assumptions from the 1930s about people with disabilities that we have since learned, rightfully, to reject. For a long time, society struggled with what to do with our brothers and sisters born with severe developmental disabilities. The widespread assumption was that they could not work, learn, or care for themselves. So what was our default solution? Isolation. For years, children with significant developmental disabilities received separate schooling. As late as the 1970s, only 1 out of 5 kids with disabilities received a public education. As those kids grew into adulthood, they were often put into institutional living where they were segregated from the rest of society. Because of that thinking, lawmakers at the time, including here in West Virginia, may have assumed that those citizens would probably never work. But to incentivize to do what we could, we allowed employment, but with a sub-minimum wage. So I submit to you, Mr. Speaker, that we've come a long way since then in our understanding and our approach of how to care for our brothers and sisters with disabilities. We have made tremendous advances in services and support since 1938. We have turned our focus to inclusion of individuals with disabilities as opposed to isolation. We have passed an Americans with Disabilities Act to extend legal protections. We have come a long way indeed in recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every person. For that reason, Mr. Speaker, I ask with this amendment that we eliminate this exception as a relic of the past, as 3 states have done in the past 3 years. There is no other class of people who face government-sanctioned wage discrimination based solely on who they are. It's long past time that people with disabilities deserve the same labor law protections as people without. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question before the House is the adoption of the secondary amendment as just explained by the gentleman from the 17th. Are the members who wish to speak to the adoption of the secondary amendment? The gentleman from the 27th, Doug Schott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think we all celebrate the advances that have occurred with respect to our severely handicapped individuals. What this exemption intends to do, and it's important to read exactly what it is, it basically exempts from the wage and hour requirements a person whose disability is so severe that it prevents his or her employment or employment training in any training or employment facility other than a nonprofit sheltered workshop. In other words, these people aren't able to work in the normal workforce. This provides an opportunity for those people to have some way to gain some dignity. Hopefully that population of people has been reduced as we've improved our treatment of both the physical and mentally handicapped. But for those who are so severe that they couldn't otherwise be employed, this does provide a ray of hope, an opportunity for those people to gain some employment. Doesn't require them to work for less than a minimum wage, but it does give them an opportunity if an employer is willing to take a chance on those folks. So for that reason, and although I certainly think we all wish that everyone would be able to earn at least a minimum wage, for this small population of individuals, I think we need to preserve this last ray of hope. I urge rejection of the amendment.
The gentleman from the first, Doug McGinn.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to echo what the esteemed chairman from the Judiciary Committee just said. Myself and the other gentleman from Hancock have a shelter workshop in our district, and I visited there before, and I'm sure the other gentleman from my district, my colleague from Hancock, has as well. And if we were to pass this amendment from my good friend, the gentleman from Cabell, essentially what you do is price those folks out of the market, unfortunately. So at least this exemption in law, if we continue to have this exemption in law, gives some of these individuals the ability to participate socially with some work, with some gainful employment, and achieve some sort of productive satisfaction at the end of the day. So I'd have to regretfully oppose the gentleman's amendment.
The lady from the 50th, Doug Longstreth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just rise to support this amendment. You know, people with disabilities, we all should be treated fairly. We've talked about fairness. We've talked about equality here in this chamber, and they should be treated as fair as anyone else, and I believe that they deserve the same wages as anyone else. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 27th, Doug Porterfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the head of the amendment or the sponsor of the amendment yield?
Sponsor does yield.
Yes, sir.
How you doing, Delegate?
Very good, sir.
First thing I'd like to ask is the employment of the people that you speak of that you're trying to get minimum wage to because of their disability. Are they held to a productivity standard in the workplace?
I believe that the process is currently governed under a waiver system through the FLSA. There's what's called a 14C waiver, where the employer has to submit information about productivity. The problem with that process is it's arguably ripe for fraud. There was an entity, I believe it was in Buchanan, West Virginia, that was cited by the Department of Labor in 2016 for that very thing. And so while the technical answer is yes, there is a productivity principle, it's not in a process that doesn't prevent from further exploitation of this population.
Understood, but I guess what I'm getting at is if these folks you're talking about with a disability, and I think everybody here, including you, who's become a friend of mine I've bumped into and things, knows I have a severe disability. But in the cases that you're talking about, these are people that are having programs given to them, and their work and their ratings and their eligibility for employment is not based upon the work that they get done. Is that correct?
I don't know that that's correct in the way it's phrased. I guess maybe the way I would suggest my position is that no class of individuals should receive less than the same labor law protections of all individuals. So to the extent that labor law protections for minimum wage apply to all workers, they should apply to all workers.
Understood. Once again, though, when we're talking about the classification of people that would not have work any other way unless they had these particular programs put in place with the pay that they are receiving, they may not be able to exist. So with that being said, once again, this is something to help people to be able to have a social interaction as well as employment, as well as some respect, but that it is not, from what I understand, especially the delegate from the first, that they are held to any minimum standard in order to hold employment. Is that how you understand that?
That's not how I understand that.
Okay.
I think the suggestion is, well, since they can't work work fully, say you could work partially, we just pay partially. And I think that the danger of that is that it reflects an understanding of people with disabilities that we have moved past. This idea that we can have a separate system, segregated, isolated for workers with disabilities, may have been an idea that passed muster in the 1930s, but we are in a situation now through means of inclusion, through services and support for people with disabilities, that we don't need to hold to this relic.
Thank you very much. I'd like to speak to the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman may proceed.
I strongly urge rejection of this amendment. As someone with a disability, if I'm hired to work, for example, here in the legislature, of course I'm voted in here, but if I was to go work in the secular world, I have to meet minimum standards with or without a disability. And if I do have that capability, then obviously this would apply. This is in no way discriminatory towards people that cannot have a minimum production in their workplace. It's not that at all. It is a program that helps people that are so severely disabled they really cannot work, but people like the delegate from the first give their life and give their time in not-for-profit work to help give them a sense of worth. And to try to increase that and put it on a comparable scale in a competitive market is not honest on this bill. This amendment. This is a very bad amendment. I utterly ask for rejection of it because it is not applicable under our state and federal laws dealing with people with disabilities, in my opinion, and I am someone with a severe disability. I thank you and ask you and urge you to reject this amendment. Thank you.
The lady from the 51st, Dr. Fleischauer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure whether I have ever been angrier on this floor. I have a grandchild who has special needs, and this says she is sub-minimum. Does that mean subhuman? Are we going to doom my grandchild to poverty for the rest of her life? Is that what we're going to do? I think that it is time we moved into the modern age. No one can barely live on a minimum wage. We shouldn't be paying anyone less than minimum wage, period. I strongly support the gentleman from Cabell's amendment, and I urge everyone to vote yes.
The gentleman from the 29th, Dr. Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I understand the gentleman's amendment, but if we look at the effect of what this is going to have, you know, right outside of my district, it's actually in gentleman from the 25th district, we have one of these sheltered workshops. How many people work in that? I mean, it's scores of people, and a lot of them come from my district. They come from the Mullins area, and these are folks that otherwise have absolutely no economic opportunities available to them other than these programs that were created eons ago that have helped people become productive, help people have enjoyment, help people develop skills. that this thinly narrow area of complete and total disability, for which no reasonable accommodation could be made in the regular workforce, applies. And now I understand the gentlelady from the 51st motion, especially when we're talking about, the fact that the minimum wage standards, wouldn't apply. But I think a lot of the protections that the amendment's seeking is, and it raises the fundamental question, is, are these people being economically exploited? And I would say no. There's other protections in our law that prevent people from being economically exploited. These people would be considered protected persons that are prevented by our criminal and civil statutes from being economically exploited. The effect of the amendment would essentially shut down a program in between my district and the gentleman in the 25th district that has served hundreds of, if not thousands, enriching their lives, where otherwise they would be stuck at home with possibly a caregiver. These people have a place to go where they can interact with others like them, where they can feel useful, where they can feel needed. And while I understand the intent, and I understand that there have been instances in the past that he's brought up in other places where there has been abuse of this type of program or system, we have laws in place that do protect against this type of conduct. And I think if we foreclose this right now, and I do understand the gentlelady from the 51st comment, but we're talking about a very, very narrow band in the economic sector where these people have absolutely, there is no accommodation that could be made into the regular workforce that gives them something of value, and it gives that organization, and these are nonprofit organizations. We're not talking about a for-profit company. We're talking about a nonprofit organization. It gives them the ability to enrich that person's life. And I would urge everyone in here to reject the amendment. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 37th, Doug Pushkin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the sponsor yield?
Sponsor does yield.
Yes. Thank you. Back here. These the sheltered workshops that we have here in West Virginia, and there aren't very many of them. They're producing a product. Some of these produce shirts, correct?
I think so. I mean, the numbers that I looked at, there was about either 6 or 7. I don't know if that counts the one that was sanctioned. So 6 or 7 workshops, and I think the number of employees was somewhere in the 250 range statewide. They perform a variety of services or production of goods, all of which are done for revenue, and then they're paid wages for their work in creating that revenue stream, generally in a nonprofit.
Okay, but these products that are made there, they are sold by these same agencies?
Presumably, either the products are sold or the services are consumed by someone.
And I imagine that these products that are being made there and sold by these agencies have to meet a certain standard if they're selling them, correct?
Presumably.
Okay, and all the amendment does is say that these human beings that work in these workshops get paid a minimum wage that everybody else is entitled to. That's it.
That is correct.
All right. And is this, one more question, this amendment, in crafting this, did you speak to any advocacy groups that support folks with disabilities?
I did. I did. That's where the data came from. And I tried to look at the other states, which I believe were Maryland, Alaska, and New Hampshire were the 3 states that have done this over the past 3 years to try to get an idea of what they're doing, to look at both the policy but also the language. Most of them just struck the exemption. There were a couple that phased it out, but I did look into that before putting the amendment in.
And so this amendment is supported by these West Virginia advocacy groups?
The ones that I spoke to, yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks for offering this amendment, and I would urge everyone to vote for this amendment. These are human beings, and all they need the same rights that we afford everybody else to work for minimum wage, which is not very much in West Virginia. That's it. They're working. They're producing goods. Those goods are being sold. They deserve to be paid a minimum wage like everybody else.
The lady from 51st, Doug Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Sir, can you tell me what is the minimum wage in West Virginia?
Was it $8.75?
Can you tell me these workshops, do they not get contracts to pay these persons?
I don't know. Presumably, you mean contracts between the employer and the employee? I don't know if they have a written contract, but they do. They have a contract of employment, and apparently they pay less than the minimum wage.
Do you know the deficit of what maybe the lowest person is getting paid?
I do not know in West Virginia. I mean, I looked around the country. There were some reports that it was, in some instances, less than $1 an hour. I saw others that it was $2, $4, but I can't speak to any of the 6 places in West Virginia.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Can I speak to the amendment?
Ladies may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I guess before this session, you're going to know my whole family history. Because again, one of my sons, who may not be severely special needs now, but he was before the age of 10. That young man that walks these halls was nonverbal until the age of 4. Now, I don't know what you feel that your work ethic is, and I don't know what you feel how much he is worth, but for you to say that someone that is in a wheelchair or someone that is severely mentally disabled is not worth $8.75, what about their choice? What can they buy with $2 to $4 an hour? We speak in here about food insecurity. We speak in here about poverty. We speak in here about education. So you're passing through the education system. These people, as you call them, they're not these people. They are West Virginians just as you and I are. And let me tell you something about these people. They are the brightest smiles when you walk into the place. They are the ones with the most open heart. They will work harder than any of you in this room. They are very thankful to be out of their homes. And you're telling me that they are not worth $8.75. This is being innovative. Is this not backwards? Is this a choice? Or they just don't have a freedom? So I guess the Civil Rights Act don't apply to them. This is disgusting, the rejection. And if you feel that that nonprofit is not going to prosper, donate to them. Don't look past it on the outskirts of that building. Walk in it. Spend a day with it. I did during my campaign. I allowed them to be part of the process. Even for those who cannot even place their name or go to a ballot box. Because this is how you make a change in West Virginia. They are not things. They are not these people. Again, I call him son. I call his friends, I take them like my own children. I am one of the delegates with Mon County Special Olympics. So please stop with this backwards thinking. Please stop with the discrimination. Please make the right choice for freedom for all, even those that you call these people.
The lady from 38th, Dr. Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to just applaud my colleague because I don't know you all that well, but one thing I definitely know about you is your heart is in the right place. And I love your passion when you speak. And I respect your ideals and that you're not afraid to share them. So that's just from me to you. This particular bill and the ramifications of it to me is one of the hardest parts of being a legislator and in the position that we are, because I love this amendment. I love what it's trying to do. I love where it wants to go, and I love that it's affirming a group of people that need love if anyone does. My problem is I can't count on people to do the right thing like like my colleague who is so passionate. I can't count on people to do the right thing and to donate to these nonprofits who are providing this platform for people who have no other platform to go to. So my concern is that we're going to all want to do the right thing and follow my colleague's lead and press yes for this amendment. And then the 6 places, which I have also visited some of these places, in West Virginia, we don't know right now what the financial impact is, because some of those places, in particular, I'm thinking of one, they bottle water here in West Virginia, are running on a very narrow profit margin. And I don't like to talk about profit margin when we're talking about something that is this worthy. But if my yes vote here, trying to do the right thing, means that these 6 places, any of them, close down and those people no longer have a platform to go to, then I can't stomach that possibility. But what I would like to offer is I would like to offer to work with anyone in the House who would like to work on this project to get those 6 nonprofits here, to find out what we can do and work on a bill that's fiscally responsible to help keep them open and accomplish the worthy objectives of my colleagues from across the aisle. So that is my proposal. I want to explain why, although it hurts my stomach and my heart to have to press no, I have to, because I cannot risk that we put these places out of business trying to do the right thing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 10th, Douglas Azinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have one of these sheltered workshops in Wood County. My brother-in-law served on the board for 25 years or so. Among some of the things they do mailings. They do greeting cards. And there's a lot of support from the community to keep it afloat. They have auctions. People pay more than they really need to for their products. I bought greeting cards from them. They're nice, but they ain't cheap. Also, they do mailings. If you would raise the minimum wage, I'm sorry. If you would raise the minimum wage to $8.75, I'll guarantee you it'll put them out of business. Now, the money these people make aren't their primary source of income. They don't live on this. They're all, virtually all of them anyway, are on disability. Most of them love their job. It's a social thing. The people that are like this group here, we're all kind of together. You know, they have that camaraderie. So I beg you not to raise that minimum wage, because you'll put 100 people out of business, out of a job. Number one, they put $1 million into our economy. Their payroll was pretty large. So before you vote, think about what you're going to do to these 6 or 7 sheltered workshops around the state. Thank you very much.
The gentleman from the 53rd, Doug Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a sheltered workshop in my area also, and before I make a move, I would ask that we could table this for one day so I can find out. I didn't know this was coming up, and I certainly don't want to make a decision that would put that sheltered workshop out of business, and I sure don't want anyone to think that I don't love those special people. So I would ask just one day so I can find out.
The proper motion is postpone rather than table, but is the gentleman's motion that action be postponed one day?
Yes.
The gentleman from the 53rd moves that further action on Senate Bill 377 be postponed by one day. Is there discussion? If not, those in favor of the gentleman from the 17th, Doug Lovejoy.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Would that motion be to postpone one day with amendments pending?
Correct, it would be.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
There are lights on. Are there members who wish to speak to the question of postponement? If not, those in favor of the gentleman's motion to postpone one day, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. Ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Further action on Senate Bill 377 be postponed one day. Next bill on second reading.
House Bill 2472, providing a special license plate for pollinators.
Are there amendments?
The Committee on Technology and Infrastructure moves to amend the bill.
The gentleman from the 16th, Doug Linville, wish to explain the amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment is somewhat technical in nature. Minority or minor committee counsel unfortunately had walking pneumonia for a while, so we would have comm-subbed this. But anyway, turns out in the original text of this bill, we had provided for a new special revenue fund for pollinators. And so for beekeepers, essentially, to be directed to the state apiarist or the state beekeeper. And unfortunately, that is unconstitutional. The Constitution mandates that it must go into the DMV Road Fund. And so this amendment makes this bill fully constitutional, and therefore I would urge passage.
Are there amendments to the amendment? If not, the question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman from the 16th. Is there discussion? If not, those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. All opposed, please say no. Ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill? If not, the bill will be advanced. Next bill on second reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2538, providing banking services for medical cannabis.
Are there amendments? Bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2579, relating to the collection of tax and the priority of distribution of an estate or property in receivership.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2618, including undue influence as a factor in the definition of financial exploitation of an elderly person or protected person.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
House Bill 2716, relating to motorboat lighting and equipment requirements.
Are there amendments?
Delegate Pack moves to amend the bill.
Does the gentleman from the 28th, Delegate Pack, wish to explain the amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon. This amendment changes the term in the bill from motorboats to vessels in two instances to better align with federal law. This is a request that has come to us from the Division of Natural Resources, and I would urge its adoption, Mr. Speaker.
The question for the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the gentleman from the 28th. Are there members who wish to speak to the amendment? Gentleman from the 22nd, Delegate Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield?
Gentleman does yield to a question.
So am I clear that now this is going to be a vessel bill instead of a motorboating bill?
That seems to be the effect of the amendment.
All right, thank you.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the adoption of the amendment? If not, those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. All opposed, please say no. Ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced. Next bill on second reading.
House Bill 2846, designating a Back the Blue plate in support of law enforcement personnel.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced. Are there further bills on second reading? If not, bills on first reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2768, reducing the use of certain prescription drugs.
Bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2834, updating and modernizing the minimum spacing provisions for the drilling of horizontal deep wells.
Bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2849, establishing different classes of pharmacy technicians.
Bill will be advanced. Are there further bills on first reading? Remarks by members of the House. The gentleman from the 10th, Dr. Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today on your desk, AARP left you a little box of chocolates. These chocolates were made in Vienna in the 10th District. Fritz Holland came to Parkersburg area probably 30 years ago. Started as a family business or family hobby. And today he owns a revised gas station that he turned into a factory to make Swiss chocolates. I'm just proud of the fact that we were able, that the AARP, and I would like to thank them, to have brought Hall's Chocolates to the legislature to let you know that there is a international business being done out of Vienna, West Virginia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 2nd, Douglas Desario.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll try to be brief. I rise before you today, my colleagues, to tell you that I said something on the floor yesterday that was not factual. I misspoke. I was a little bit taken back when I heard a list of school closures being read off, and I took it as, because of our poor education system, that these schools were being closed. I stated that my grandchildren went to Franklin School, which they do. And I also told you that I drove by on a daily basis past Jefferson Elementary School, which I do, and they're operating. I made the statement that my sister was a teacher at Hooverson Heights School, and that's where I misspoke. She spent her entire career at that school, but she is retired now, so she's not a teacher at that school. But within that list, I was taken back a little bit, you know, when I heard that school where my grandchildren went. And I heard all these other schools that have closed, like Wellsburg Middle School and Follansbee Middle School. But it was never mentioned that they closed because we have a brand new, state-of-the-art, multi-million-dollar middle school on the same campus as our high school. To me, my friends, that's thinking forward. It was mentioned that Beach Bottom Elementary was closed. Collier's Elementary was closed. Wellsburg Elementary was closed, along with Millsop Elementary. Those schools were combined because of our decreasing membership in our schools. They were combined to use the most central locations. And I don't speak for the Board of Education, but rumor has it around town that those schools that have been combined in the future are going to be put on the same campus as our high school and our middle school, which I believe is kind of forward thinking. So now my point today is that I misspoke, and I'm here to own it. I think the people that we represent deserve for us to own what we say, not to just throw stuff up against the wall and see what sticks or see who will believe it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from 26, Douglas Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday we had a very long day, and you sort of went right through comments by the delegates, and that's okay. That's cool. But Tuesday, I wanted to bring this out yesterday, but Tuesday, Fall River Elementary had some, well, they had pages here a couple of days before that, but Tuesday, 100% of those students attended school. From kindergarten to 5th grade, not a single student was absent. And I wanted to recognize Fall River Elementary School and their principal, who's one of my former students actually, in McDowell County, for having such an incredible achievement. How many schools in West Virginia on any given day have 100% of the student population sitting in a chair in the classroom being taught by a teacher? And I think that's an incredible achievement. Congratulations, Fall River Elementary.
The gentleman from 30th, Douglas Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just an unanimous consent request that the remarks from yesterday by the gentleman from the 61st regarding his hardworking superintendent of schools and our executive being printed in the appendix of the journal.
Are there objections? Chair hears no objections.
Thank you.
The lady from the 51st, Douglas Fleshour.
Thank you. I wanted to make a new statement today in response to what the gentleman from Woods said, and I wanted to own it. I think Hall's truffles are the best thing I have ever eaten in my entire life. If anybody doesn't want their truffles, I will share them with the world. They are just so, so wonderful, and I wish I had that factory in my county. Thank you for reminding us all on this wonderful day about love.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Oh, thank you so much, because it's just such a wonderful product, and I'm so proud they're from West Virginia.
The gentleman from the 16th, Douglas Linville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today just to mention that we all seem to get a kick sometimes out of asking for remarks to be printed in the appendix of the journal. And I've had some conversations with Clerk Harrison, and it turns out that's pretty expensive. And takes quite a long time in some candid remarks that he had with me. And so there are certainly things that are exceptionally important that should be printed in the appendix of the journal. Some things that aren't, maybe shouldn't. Please do not ask for unanimous consent to print my comments right now in the appendix of the journal. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 61st, Douglas Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that the exceptional comments from the gentleman from the 2nd, Delegate DeSerio, and the comments from the gentleman from the 26th, Delegate Evans, be printed in the appendix of the journal.
Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Gentleman from the 50th, Delegate Caputo.
Yeah, I'd just very quickly like to mention that creating new license plates costs a hell of a lot of money, too.
Gentleman from the 16th, Douglas Linville.
I'd just like to mention that if y'all don't like beekeepers, you can vote it down.
Gentleman from the 32nd, Douglas Fast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do ask unanimous consent that the comments and exchange between the delegate from the 58th, Delegate Coles, and the 60th, Delegate Wilson, yesterday on HFA Wilson 2-13, number 13, be printed in the appendix of the journal.
Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Are there further remarks by members? The lady from the 4th, Douglas Zukoff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given in light of what we've been talking about all week, tomorrow in the Northern Panhandle is the first round of the West Virginia History Bowl. And Marshall County, the Cameron Junior High, Cameron High School, is the 3-time reigning champ of that contest. And I just want to wish all of our students well tomorrow.
The lady from the 38th, Douglas Graves.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today just to tell all of my colleagues how much I love you, except for the one in front of me.
Introduction to guests. Introduction to guests. Gentleman from the 9th, Douglas Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, for Doctor of the Day, comes to us from the home of the West Virginia Strawberry Festival, Buchanan, West Virginia. Please welcome Dr. Joseph Reed.
Gentleman from the 17th, Douglas Rohrbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to introduce today Brian Gallagher, who is in the rear gallery. He's with the Marshall University School of Pharmacy. He's also a former member of this body, and if the House would make him feel welcome.
The gentleman from the 43rd, Douglas Hartman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have the President of the State Board of Education here to thank us for our hard work yesterday. Former member, the Honorable David Perry.
Further introductions. Miscellaneous business. If not, lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and welcome back, Delegate Kump. I was glad not to have to do leaves of absence. I move, subject to announcements, that the House adjourn until 11 a.m. Friday, February 15th.
Lady from the 49th moves that, subject to announcements, the House stand adjourned until 11 a.m. on tomorrow, Friday, February 15th. Are there announcements? Gentleman from the 10th, Douglas Chris.
Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Finance will meet tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to take up legislation. The agenda will be posted. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from the 35th, Douglas Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the chairman of Judiciary mentioned yesterday, the Committee on the Judiciary will meet at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning in the committee room, and the agenda will be posted.
Gentleman 21st, Douglas Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Believe it or not, we do have other education bills to consider, so your Committee on Education will be meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in the Education Committee room. The agenda will be posted.
Gentleman 28th, Douglas Pack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Government Organization will meet tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in the House Government Organization Committee room, and the agenda is posted.
Gentleman from the 9th, Douglas Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Committee on Prevention and Treatment of Substance Abuse will meet today at 3:30, room 215E. Agenda will be posted.
Lady from the 3rd, Douglas Storch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Committee on Political Subdivisions will meet today at 4 o'clock in House Education. The agenda is posted.
Gentleman from the 1st, Douglas McGeehan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Veterans Affairs and Homeland Security will meet this afternoon at 5:30 in House Education. Republican members will caucus in House Education at 5 o'clock. The agenda is posted.
Gentleman from the 12th, Douglas Westfall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Got two announcements. Your Banking Insurance Committee will not meet this afternoon. We're done. But we also have lunch provided by Sam's Uptown Cafe in 204. It's sponsored by the West Virginia Hospitality and Travel Association. It might be a little bit cold, but you can always warm it up. So,
Gentleman from the 41st, Douglas Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Health and Human Resources will meet today at 3:15 in room 215E, and Republicans will caucus in the chairman's office at 2:45. The agenda is posted.
Gentleman from the 10th, Douglas Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Energy will meet today in Judiciary Committee room at 3:15. The agenda is posted. Republican members will not caucus prior to the meeting.
Gentleman 27th, Douglas Ellington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Conference Committee on House Bill 2351 relating to regulating prior authorizations is scheduled to meet on Monday, February 18th at 12:45 in room 215E. Members of the Conference Committee are Delegates Holland, Staggers, and myself.
The gentleman from the 15th, Douglas Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your subcommittee on House Bill 2864, which is the judicial pay bill, including myself, gentleman from the 35th, Delegate Byrd, gentleman from the 29th, Delegate Steele, gentleman from the 16th, Delegate Mant, gentleman from the 17th, Delegate Lovejoy, will meet at 4:30 in the Judiciary Committee room.
Today?
Today, yes.
The gentleman from the 17th, Douglas Rohrbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Two announcements. Your Committee on Seniors, Children, and Family Issues will convene 15 minutes. That's 15 minutes after the adjournment of this session in the House Government Organization room. And the Committee on Substance Abuse, I think with two committees before it, we're going to move that back to 4 o'clock today in the Government Organization Conference room. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from the 50th, Douglas Caputo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our distinguished photographer asked me to make an announcement. For those of us that have interns this week, and if you want a photo with that intern, he would prefer you do it today if you have the time rather than tomorrow. So let's try to accommodate Perry immediately after session if you want to do an intern photo. Thank you.
Are there further announcements?
Mr. Speaker.
Lady in the 49th.
Your Rules Committee will meet tomorrow at 10:45 behind the chamber.
Are there further announcements? If not, question before the House is a motion by the lady from the 49th that the House stand adjourned until 11 a.m. on Friday, February 15th. Those in favor will say aye. Any opposed will say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adjourned. We'll meet tomorrow at 11 a.m.